They told this quirkless kid he was worthless, no chance whatsoever. So what did he do? He gave them 7 minutes. 7 minutes is all it takes to fuck them up. He ended the entire human species and replaced it into a better one. Yeah, let's go.
Welcome, legends, to Chronos Recom. I wrote this story myself, so if you have any suggestions or what-ifs you want to see, drop it in the comments below. Also, just wanted to let you know I've got a Patreon set up now for anyone who wants to support the channel directly. You can get early access to stories, submit direct fan requests, and get exclusive content. It's totally optional, but if you want to help keep these stories coming, check it out. Links in the description. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit that bell so you never miss an upload. Let's dive into this story.
The wind on top of that building smelled like nothing, like air that had given up trying to carry anything worth breathing. Izuku Midoriya stood on the rooftop with his yellow backpack slung over one shoulder, the notebook in his hand still open to the page where he'd written, "Can I be a hero too?" in handwriting that shook when he put pen to paper. All Might stood before him. Deflated, skeletal, steam still rising from where the massive form had collapsed into this gaunt, hollow-cheeked stranger who coughed blood into his fist like it was a habit he'd long stopped being embarrassed about. The #1 hero, the symbol of peace, the man whose smile was supposed to mean that everything was going to be okay. He looked Izuku dead in the eyes and said the words that every quirkless person on the planet had already heard 1,000 times in 1,000 different ways. "I'm sorry, young man. Without a quirk, you can't be a hero." There it was, the final nail, the last door, the one person in the entire world who was supposed to be different, who was supposed to see potential where everyone else saw nothing. And he said the exact same thing as every teacher, every classmate, every stranger on the street, every doctor who had pointed at the x-ray of a foot with 2 joints and declared a 4-year-old boy's future dead on arrival. The wind picked up. Izuku's hair moved across his forehead. Something happened in his eyes. Something shifted. It was subtle. A flicker. Like a screen going dark for half a second and rebooting with different software. If All Might had been watching closer, if he hadn't already been turning to leave, already dismissing the boy as another sad casualty of genetic lottery, he might have noticed it. He might have noticed the way Izuku's pupils contracted. The way his posture changed, the way the trembling in his hands stopped completely, like someone had flipped a switch. Izuku did not cry. He did not beg. He closed the notebook, slowly, deliberately. He looked down at the cover, the one plastered with Hero Analysis for the Future 13 in bright, hopeful letters, and he let out a breath that carried something out of him, something old, something that had been holding him together with duct tape and blind optimism for 14 years. And then he laughed. It was low, slow. It started in his chest and rolled out through his teeth like smoke. It was the kind of laugh that made the air around it feel 10 degrees colder. All Might stopped mid-turn. He looked back over his bony shoulder. Izuku was smiling, but the smile was wrong. It was too calm, too steady, too aware. He tossed the notebook over the edge of the rooftop without looking. It caught the wind and spiraled down toward the street below, pages fluttering like the wings of something dying. Then he tossed the yellow backpack after it. It fell straight down and hit the pavement with a distant thud. "You're right," Izuku said. His voice was different, measured, each word placed with intention like a chess piece being moved into position. "I shouldn't be a hero." He turned to face All Might fully, and All Might, the man who had fought all for one, who had carried the weight of an entire society's hope on his shoulders for decades, felt something crawl up his spine that he hadn't felt in years. Izuku's eyes were clear, absolutely, terrifyingly clear. "I should be a god." He held All Might's gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked toward the rooftop door. His footsteps were even, unhurried, the kind of walk that belonged to someone who had already decided what came next and was simply going through the motions of getting there. The door closed behind him with a metallic click. All Might stood alone on the rooftop. The wind moved through his oversized clothes. His sunken eyes stared at the closed door. His gut told him something had just happened, something important, something he should pay attention to. But his rational mind waved it off, a quirkless middle school student having a dramatic reaction to bad news. It happened. It was sad. But it was normal. He had no idea. He had absolutely no idea. That was the last time anyone overlooked Izuku Midoriya. The dreams had been there his whole life. He just hadn't understood them until now. Fragments. Flashes. A laboratory with steel walls and humming fluorescent lights. The weight of a handgun in a gloved palm. The burn of something injected directly into the bloodstream. Something that rewrote you at the cellular level, turned your veins into highways of fire, and left you standing on the other side of human. The memories belonged to someone else. Someone cold. Someone brilliant. Someone who had looked at the world and seen it for exactly what it was. A species on the edge of a cliff, too stupid to realize it was already falling. Albert Wesker. The name had surfaced in his mind like a bubble rising from deep water. It came with everything. The knowledge, the philosophy, the science, the conviction. Decades of memory from a life lived in another world. A world without quirks, without heroes, without the grotesque carnival of genetic lottery that this society had turned into religion. A world where evolution had to be taken by force. Izuku sat in his bedroom that night, the one covered in All Might posters, the one that still smelled like the childhood of a boy who believed in heroes, and he stared at the ceiling. He didn't feel sad. That surprised him. He expected to feel crushed, broken, suicidal even. That's what was supposed to happen when your entire reason for living got stomped on by the person you admired most. Instead, he felt awake. For the first time in 14 years, Izuku Midoriya felt completely, absolutely awake. He sat up, he pulled his computer toward him, he started typing. He didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the one after that. Within 72 hours, he had accessed 3 government databases, 2 international pharmaceutical networks, and the encrypted servers of a black market biotech firm operating out of the I-Island Research District. The firewalls meant to protect these systems were designed to keep out professional hackers backed by state-level resources. Izuku moved through them like they were screen doors. The knowledge in his head, Wesker's knowledge, a lifetime of infiltrating the most secure organizations on a planet, made these digital defenses look like children's games. He drained 6 offshore accounts tied to underground quirk enhancement drug operations. Laundered the money through 17 shell companies he created in a single afternoon. Purchased lab equipment through front organizations that existed for exactly 8 hours before dissolving into digital smoke. His mother noticed he was spending more time in his room. She brought him food. She asked if he was okay. He told her he was fine. He smiled at her. The smile was warm. Wesker had never been sentimental, but Izuku was still in there, buried under the new architecture of his mind. He loved his mother. That hadn't changed. What had changed was that he now understood the world she lived in was a failed experiment, and he was going to fix it, whether it wanted to be fixed or not. Within 2 weeks, he had found it. An abandoned subway maintenance hub 3 levels below the city's infrastructure, forgotten by municipal records, disconnected from the power grid. Perfect. He converted it into a laboratory. It took him 2 months. He worked alone. He hauled equipment down service tunnels in the dead of night. He installed generators, filtration systems, centrifuges, cryogenic storage, and a computer array that rivaled anything in the top universities of Japan. He stole what he couldn't buy. He built what he couldn't steal. The knowledge in his head was a blueprint that this world's science hadn't even begun to approach. The lab was beautiful. Blue light from dozens of monitors reflecting off polished steel surfaces, the hum of machines processing data, the quiet drip of fluids moving through tubes. It felt like home. He stood in front of his main workstation and pulled up everything he had gathered on quirks. The genetic research, the mutation patterns, the evolutionary data. He cross-referenced it with what he knew, what Wesker knew, about viral biology, about the progenitor virus, about Ouroboros, and what he found made him smile. Quirks were a disease. That wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't philosophical. It was literal. Quirks were the result of an unstable genetic mutation that had spread through the human population like a virus. altering DNA at the germline level, creating random, uncontrolled expressions of power that ranged from devastating to utterly useless. The quirk factor was, at its core, a biological accident, a mutation that humanity had chosen to worship rather than study. Rather than cure, the world had built an entire civilization around a genetic defect. Heroes, villains, society, economy, identity. All of it constructed on the back of random chance, on whether or not your cells decided to give you the ability to shoot fire from your hands or turn your fingers into slightly longer fingers. It was pathetic. Izuku looked at the data on his screen and felt something Wesker had felt many times before. The cold, clean clarity of understanding exactly what needed to be done. He wasn't going to play their game. He wasn't going to become a hero in a broken system or a villain raging against it from the margins. Both roles were reactive. Both roles accepted the premise that the current world had value worth fighting over. He was going to replace it. The Ouroboros project, Wesker's magnum opus from another life, had been designed to forcibly evolve humanity. Had to select those worthy of the new world and eliminate those who were too weak to survive the transition. It had failed in Wesker's world because the virus had been imperfect, too aggressive, too indiscriminate. It turned most subjects into writhing, black tentacled abominations rather than the superior beings it was meant to create. But Izuku had something Wesker never had: quirk genetics. The quirk factor was, for all its randomness, proof that the human genome could accept radical alteration and remain functional. The mutation had spread across the entire species in just a few generations. The delivery mechanism was already built into human DNA. All Izuku had to do was hijack it. He worked for 4 months straight. He barely ate. He barely slept. He synthesized, tested, failed, adjusted, synthesized again. He burned through 17 iterations of the virus, each one closer than the last. He tested on tissue samples, on cell cultures, on rats that he enhanced with synthetic quirk factor before introducing the virus iteration 13. Turned a lab rat into something that could bend steel bars and regenerate a severed tail in under a minute. Iteration 15 killed everything it touched within seconds. Iteration 18 was perfect. He held the vial up to the blue light of his monitors. The liquid inside was black and gold, swirling slowly like something alive. Because it was alive. It was the bridge between what humanity was and what humanity could become. It was Ouroboros reborn, rebuilt from the ground up using quirk factor as its foundation, progenitor virus principles as its architecture, and Albert Wesker's genius as its guiding hand. He set the vial down. He walked to the center of the lab where he had prepared an injection station, a reclined chair surrounded by monitoring equipment that would track every change in his body in real time. He sat down. He rolled up his sleeve. He picked up the syringe. He paused. This was the moment. The line. On one side was Izuku Midoriya, a quirkless kid from Musutafu who collected hero notebooks and cried too easily and believed in the goodness of people even when they gave him nothing but cruelty in return. On the other side was something new, something that had never existed before. He thought about his mother's face, about her hands wrapping around his when he was small, telling him she was sorry, so sorry she couldn't give him the world he wanted. He thought about Katsuki Bakugo's explosions and sneering face and the way he had told Izuku to jump off the roof and pray for a quirk in his next life. He thought about every sideways look, every whispered insult, every closed door. He thought about All Might on that rooftop, steam still rising from his skeletal frame, saying the words that killed the last good thing in Izuku Midoriya's heart. He pushed the needle into his vein and pressed the plunger. The reaction was immediate. His veins turned black. Literally black, visible through his skin like a network of dark lightning spreading outward from the injection site. His heart rate spiked to 200, 300. The monitors screamed. His body temperature hit 106 degrees and kept climbing. His muscles seized. His back arched off the chair. Pain, real pain. The kind of pain that exists beyond screaming, beyond thrashing, beyond any physical response, the kind that just is. That fills every atom of your body and rewrites the definition of sensation in your nervous system. Most people would have died in the first 30 seconds. Their cells would have rejected the virus, their organs would have liquefied, and they would have spent their last moments as a screaming pile of black biological waste on a laboratory floor. Izuku's body accepted it. It fought. God, it fought. His DNA unraveled and rebuilt itself strand by strand, codon by codon. Muscle fibers tore apart and reformed denser, stronger, faster. His nervous system rewired itself, creating pathways that normal human biology couldn't support. His bones cracked and healed and cracked again, each time coming back harder. His eyes, those plain green, too wide with wonder eyes, burned. They burned like someone had poured molten metal directly into his skull. And then it was over. The monitors flatlined, then beeped back to life with readings that shouldn't have been possible. Heart rate. Body temperature, normal. Blood pressure, perfect. Brain activity, off the charts. Izuku opened his eyes. They were red. Deep, vivid, burning red. The pupils were vertical slits, like a predator, like something that had climbed to the top of the food chain and was looking down at everything below with cold, patient hunger. He stood up from the chair. No weakness, no trembling. He felt his own body like he was wearing it for the first time. Every muscle, every tendon, every nerve ending singing with power that he could feel in the spaces between his cells. He raised one hand and clenched his fist. The air around his knuckles compressed. A small shockwave rippled outward, enough to crack the concrete floor beneath his feet. He walked to the far wall of the lab. 30 feet of reinforced concrete and steel rebar. He placed his palm flat against it and pushed. Not punched. Pushed. The wall crumbled inward like wet cardboard, opening a hole into the adjacent tunnel with a grinding roar of displaced stone. He moved. One step. But the step covered the entire length of the lab in a fraction of a heartbeat, a blur of motion that left a black afterimage hanging in the air where he'd been standing. His feet touched down on the other side without a sound. Phantom Dash. The name came to him naturally, like something he'd always known. He picked up a steel pipe from the rubble, bent it into a pretzel with his fingers, tossed it aside. He walked to the mirror he'd installed above the small sink in the corner. He looked at himself. Same face, same green hair, same freckles. But the eyes were different. Everything behind them was different. The boy who had stood on that rooftop 6 months ago was gone, burned away at the cellular level and replaced with something that this world, this hero-worshipping, quirk-obsessed, fundamentally broken world, had never seen before. He reached into a storage case on his workbench and pulled out a pair of sunglasses. Custom-made, midnight black lenses, sleek titanium frames. He put them on. The red glow of his eyes vanished behind the dark lenses. He pulled on the coat next. Black leather. Long, tailored perfectly to his frame, falling just below his knees. Beneath it, tactical combat gear, matte black body armor, utility belt, reinforced boots. At his hip, the samurai edge, a handgun he had built from scratch, custom barrel, match-grade trigger, chambered in a caliber that could punch through engine blocks. It wasn't his primary weapon. He was his primary weapon. But there was something about the weight of it that felt right. It felt like memory. He looked at himself one more time. Izuku Midoriya was dead. What stood in the mirror was Albert Wesker incarnate. Born into a world of quirks and heroes, armed with the combined intellect and ambition of 2 lifetimes, and carrying inside his blood a virus that could reshape the entire human species. He adjusted his sunglasses with one finger. He straightened his coat. "The right to be a god," he said to his reflection, his voice low and even. "That right is now mine." He walked out of the lab. He climbed the access tunnels. He pushed open the maintenance hatch at street level and stepped into the night air of Musutafu City. The streets were alive with the distant sounds of hero patrols and civilian traffic, and the ever-present noise of a society that had built itself around powers it didn't understand. He looked up at the skyline. The lights of UA High School glowed on the distant hilltop. He smiled. The world wasn't ready for what was coming. But that was fine. It didn't need to be ready. It just needed to survive long enough to see what he had planned. 6 months. That's how long Izuku Midoriya was gone from the world. 6 months of silence. No school attendance, no social media, no trace. His mother had filed a missing persons report after the first week. The police had investigated for exactly 12 days before the case went cold. Quirkless kid from a single-parent household, no friends, no connections, history of bullying. The system filed him under probable runaway and moved on. Nobody came looking. Nobody cared enough to dig deeper. Izuku Midoriya cried herself to sleep every night for 3 months. Then she got a letter. Hand-delivered. No return address. Inside was a note written in handwriting she recognized, but that somehow looked different. Sharper, more controlled, each letter formed with mechanical precision. I am alive. I am safe. I am becoming something greater. Do not look for me. I will come back when the time is right. I love you. No signature, but she knew. A mother always knows. She put the letter in a drawer and started sleeping a little easier. Just a little. Meanwhile, the world kept spinning in its usual chaotic orbit. Hero society churned forward. Villains attacked, heroes saved. The cycle repeated endlessly. The same wheel turning, the same problems recycled and repackaged as new crises for the evening news. UA High School held its entrance exams. Class 1A was formed. The usual roster of prodigies and legacies and one angry blonde with more firepower than emotional intelligence. Katsuki Bakugo had aced the exam. Of course he had. He blew through the robot army like a one-man demolition crew, racking up the highest combat score in the history of the practical test. He walked into Class 1A on the first day like he already owned it, feet on the desk, explosions crackling from his palms, daring anyone in the room to challenge him. Shoto Todoroki sat in the back, quiet, cold, carrying the weight of Endeavor's expectations like a chain around his neck. He froze the entire testing arena in a single move during his exam. Efficient, overwhelming, joyless. Ochako Uraraka floated robots into the sky and dropped them. Tenya Ida ran through them like a human bullet train. Momo Yaoyorozu created weapons from her skin. Fumikage Tokoyami let Dark Shadow tear through steel like paper. 20 students, 20 quirks, 20 futures that Hero Society had already started projecting onto. The next generation of protectors, the inheritors of All Might's legacy, the ones who would keep the wheel turning. They had no idea what was coming for them. Aizawa Shota, Eraserhead, stood at the front of the class on the first day, his capture weapon draped around his neck like a scarf, his eyes communicating his total disinterest in pleasantries. I'm your homeroom teacher. I have the authority to expel any of you at any time. Don't give me a reason. He meant it. He always meant it. Aizawa had expelled entire classes before. He had zero tolerance for wasted potential and even less for students who thought raw power was a substitute for discipline. The first weeks were intense. Training, assessment. The battle trial where Bakugo nearly brought down an entire building trying to beat Todoroki, only to get frozen mid-explosion and left standing in a block of ice with nothing but fury in his eyes. The quirk apprehension test where Aizawa pushed each student to their limits and made mental notes about which ones would crack under real pressure. Normal. Predictable. Exactly what UA had been doing for decades. And then came the USJ, the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, UA's crown jewel training facility. A massive dome housing multiple disaster zones, flood, landslide, fire, hurricane, ruins, mountain, each one designed to simulate real-world rescue scenarios at a scale that made most other training facilities look like playgrounds. Class 1A arrived on a bus buzzing with nervous energy. 13, the rescue hero, stood at the entrance to greet them. Behind her, the dome opened up into a sprawling landscape of controlled chaos. Today's exercise focuses on rescue operations, 13 explained, her suit's voice projector giving her words a slight echo. You will learn to use your quirks to save lives, not just fight. She stopped. The air changed. Everyone felt it. A cold drop in pressure, like the building itself took a breath and held it. At the center of the plaza below, the air split. A dark, swirling portal, purple and black, like a wound in the fabric of space, opened wide. Figures began pouring through. Dozens of them. Then more. Villains. Real villains. Armed, aggressive, spreading out across the facility with the practiced movement of people who had planned this. Aizawa's eyes went wide. He pulled his capture weapon tight. Those aren't part of the exercise. At the center of the portal stood two figures. One was wrapped in a mist-like body, Kurogiri, the Warp Gate villain, his yellow eyes glowing from within the dark cloud of his form. The other was thin, lanky, covered in disembodied hands, one clutching his face like a grotesque mask. Shigaraki Tamura. His red eyes peered out between the fingers of the hand on his face, twitching with a manic energy that sat somewhere between excitement and psychosis, and behind them, towering, massive, brain exposed, beak-like mouth frozen in a permanent snarl, the Nomu. the bioengineered weapon, the thing that had been built specifically, explicitly, to kill All Might. The schedule said All Might would be here, Shigaraki muttered, scratching his neck raw. Where is he? Where is he? This is annoying. This is really, really annoying. Patience, Shigaraki Tamura, Kurogiri said calmly. The plan will proceed regardless. Aizawa turned to the students. His face was stone. Stay together. Protect each other. 13. Get them to the exit and call for backup. He pulled his goggles down over his eyes and leaped off the staircase, dropping into the horde of villains below. His capture weapon flew. His erasure activated. Quirks shut off. Bodies hit the ground. Aizawa moved through the crowd like a machine, brutal, but there were too many, and the Nomu hadn't moved yet. Kurogiri appeared at the top of the stairs. His mist body expanded, engulfing the students before they could retreat. And then they were scattered, warped to different zones across the USJ, separated, isolated, dropped into fights they weren't ready for. Bakugo and Eijiro Kirishima landed in the ruin zone, back to back, surrounded by villains who smelled blood. Todoroki appeared in the landslide zone alone. His left side, the fire side, stayed dormant. He froze everything in a 20-meter radius in the time it took to exhale. Tsuyuasui and Minoru Mineta crashed into the flood zone, treading water while villains with aquatic mutations circled them like sharks. Chaos. Total, deliberate, orchestrated chaos. Shigaraki watched from the center plaza, scratching his neck, waiting for All Might. The Nomu stood beside him like a statue. Aizawa fought below, exhausted, bleeding, his elbow shattered by a lucky hit, his capture weapon in tatters. He was running out of time. And that's when the doors exploded. The main entrance to the USJ, reinforced steel, 3 feet thick, built to withstand natural disasters and villain assaults, flew off their hinges, both of them. They rocketed forward and crashed into the ground 50 meters inside the facility, carving trenches in the concrete and kicking up clouds of dust and debris. Everyone stopped. The villains in the plaza turned. Shigaraki stopped scratching. The Nomu's head rotated toward the sound. Through the dust, a figure walked in. Boots clicked on the concrete, slow, steady, measured. Each step echoed through the sudden silence of the dome like a metronome. He emerged from the dust cloud, black leather trench coat falling to his knees, tactical combat gear underneath, matte black, form-fitting, functional, hands in his coat pockets, posture straight, shoulders relaxed, midnight black sunglasses reflecting the artificial light of the USJ, green hair, freckles, a face that under different circumstances might have belonged to a nervous middle school kid, but the energy coming off this person was something else entirely. It filled the room. It pressed against the walls. It made the air heavier. Every person in the facility, hero, student, villain, felt it at the same time. The primal animal brain recognition that something at the top of the food chain had just entered the room. Izuku Midoriya stopped walking. He stood at the edge of the main staircase, looking down at the chaos below. His expression was calm, bored, almost, like he had walked into a room full of children throwing a tantrum and was mildly disappointed by the mess. Shigaraki squinted at him from across the plaza. Who the hell is this NPC? No one answered. Kurogiri's yellow eyes narrowed. Something about this individual made his mist body ripple involuntarily. He's not on the faculty roster, Kurogiri said. He's not a student either. I've memorized every face. I don't care who he is. Shigaraki waved a dismissive hand. Nomu, kill him. The Nomu moved. If you've never seen a Nomu move at full speed, you can't understand what it looks like. It's a blur of muscle and engineered violence. A biological missile designed to move faster than the human eye can track and hit harder than anything organic has the right to. It closed the distance between itself and Izuku in less than a second. Its fist, a fist that could match All Might's punches, a fist that could crater reinforced steel, rocketed forward in a straight punch aimed at Izuku's chest. Izuku did not take his hands out of his pockets. He was there, and then he wasn't. Phantom Dash, a black afterimage, like a shadow that stayed behind for a fraction of a heartbeat, hung in the air where he'd been standing. The Nomu's fist passed through empty space and cratered the concrete behind where the target had been. Izuku reappeared directly behind the Nomu. Same posture, same relaxed shoulders, hands still in pockets. He hadn't moved. He'd ceased to exist in one location and begun existing in another, with nothing in between except a flicker of darkness. Before the Nomu could process what happened, before its shock absorption and regeneration even had a chance to prepare, Izuku pulled his right hand from his pocket and drove it forward. His arm punched straight through the Nomu's back, and not around it, not into it, through it. His hand emerged from the creature's chest cavity, and in his grip was a chunk of the bioengineered core, a mass of dark, pulsing tissue and synthetic muscle that served as the creature's central processing hub. He held it up, examined it. The light from the USJ's artificial sky reflected off the wet organic surface. "Fascinating," he said, his voice carrying across the silent plaza with the clarity of someone who knew every ear was listening. But ultimately, crude. He dropped the core tissue. It hit the ground with a wet slap. Then he kicked the Nomu one kick. A single whip-fast impact to the creature's midsection. The sound it made was beyond a crack. It was a detonation, a sonic event, a noise that physically hurt the ears of everyone within 50 meters. The Nomu was launched. Its body flew backward across the entire width of the USJ dome, spinning, ragdolling, and slammed into the mountain zone with an impact that registered on seismographs across Musutafu. The shockwave that rippled outward from the point of contact shattered the glass panels of the flood zone, kicked up a wall of dust in the ruins zone, and knocked two villains standing too close off their feet. The Nomu did not get back up. Silence. Complete, suffocating silence. The kind where you can hear your own heartbeat and the breathing of the person next to you and the distant groan of settling concrete. Every villain in the USJ froze. Not by choice, by instinct. The same instinct that makes a rabbit go still when a hawk's shadow passes overhead. Every student of Class 1A, scattered across the facility, mid-fight, mid-survival, stopped and stared toward the central plaza. They had felt the shockwave. They had heard the impact. They had seen, even from a distance, the dark blur that sent the Nomu, the thing that had been manhandling Aizawa, flying like a baseball. Katsuki Bakugo stood in the ruins zone, a villain limp at his feet, and looked toward the center. His explosions had gone quiet. His palms hung at his sides. His mouth was slightly open. Shoto Todoroki stood in the landslide zone, ice still spreading from his right foot, and felt something he rarely felt. Genuine, undiluted surprise. Aizawa lay on the ground, broken arm held against his chest, blood running down his face. He looked up at the figure in the black coat and tried to make his brain process what he had just seen. His brain refused. Shigaraki Tamura's hand was shaking. The hand on his face, the one he always touched, always clung to, the anchor that kept his composure from unraveling, his fingers were trembling against it. What? The hell? Izuku looked at him. The sunglasses reflected Shigaraki's face back at him. "Your right to live," Izuku said, and his voice was a flat, cold thing without warmth or malice or anything human in it at all, "is being revoked. Phantom dash. Black after image. Gone." Shigaraki's eyes went wide. His hand came up, the decaying hand, the five-finger death touch that could disintegrate anything it made full contact with, and he reached out wildly, spinning, trying to find where the threat had gone. "Kurogiri, where is?" Izuku appeared directly behind Shigaraki. Same way as before. Same impossible, silent relocation. One instant, the space behind the villain was empty. The next, Izuku was standing there like he'd always been there. He punched Shigaraki in the back of the head. The word punch doesn't do it justice. The force that Izuku put into that strike was beyond what the human body was designed to withstand, deliver, or comprehend. The impact was so sudden, so absolute that Shigaraki's body simply could not keep up with what happened to it. The hand on his face shattered. His skull cracked. His feet left the ground. Shigaraki Tamura, the leader of the League of Villains, the protege of All for One, the one who was supposed to be the next great threat to Hero Society, hit the concrete face first with a sound like a watermelon dropped from a 10-story building. His body bounced once, twitched, and then went completely still. He was dead before he landed. Kurogiri reacted. He had to. His entire purpose was to protect Shigaraki, and Shigaraki was now a broken thing on the ground that would never get back up. The Mist villain expanded his warp gate, a massive portal opening directly in front of Izuku, designed to teleport him into the stratosphere or into the bottom of the ocean or anywhere that wasn't here. Izuku walked through the portal and came out the other side. Kurogiri stared. That shouldn't have been possible. His warp gate was a spatial displacement field. It didn't have an other side unless he created one. But Izuku had somehow stepped through it and emerged 5 feet behind the portal without being redirected, like the warp field simply refused to touch him. Spatial manipulation, Izuku said, turning to face Kurogiri. You relocate matter through a dimensional fold anchored to your body. Impressive range. Poor defensive application. He reached into the mist. His hand found something solid, the metal brace at Kurogiri's neck, the one that housed his physical form. He grabbed it. Kurogiri tried to warp, tried to scatter, tried to flee. Izuku squeezed. The metal crumpled like tinfoil. Kurogiri's form flickered. The mist stuttered, contracted, and then dispersed like smoke in a strong wind. The metal brace clattered to the ground, mangled and empty. 2 liters. 2 kills. Under 30 seconds. And Izuku hadn't broken a sweat. His hair wasn't out of place. His coat didn't have a speck of dust on it. He stood in the center of the USJ Plaza, surrounded by the bodies of the 2 villains who had orchestrated this entire attack, and he looked exactly the same as when he'd walked in. Hands in pockets, posture relaxed, expression mild. The remaining villains, the foot soldiers, the hired muscle, the low-level criminals who had been promised easy money for attacking some high school kids, looked at each other. One of them ran. That triggered the flood. Suddenly, they were all running, scrambling for the exits, tripping over each other, some of them screaming. They dropped weapons. They abandoned positions. They fled the facility like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Izuku watched them run. He tilted his head slightly like a cat watching mice scatter. He vanished. What happened next lasted approximately 45 seconds. Later, when the USJ's security cameras were recovered and the footage was reviewed by every intelligence agency in Japan, those 45 seconds would be watched, rewatched, analyzed frame by frame, and argued about in classified briefings for months. Izuku moved through the USJ like a black wind, phantom dashing from zone to zone, ruins, flood, fire, mountain, landslide, appearing behind, beside, above fleeing villains and putting them down with single strikes. A palm thrust to the sternum that stopped a heart, a kick that launched a body through 3 walls, a grab and throw that sent a villain from the flood zone into the ceiling of the dome 100 feet above. He was everywhere. He was nowhere. One moment a villain would be running toward an exit, and the next moment they were crumpled on the ground and the sound of boots clicking was already fading in the opposite direction. In the flood zone, Tsuyuasui was holding Mineta above water while 3 aquatic villains circled them. She was scared, genuinely, deeply scared, in a way that her frog-calm exterior barely contained. One of the villains lunged. A black blur intercepted. The villain was there, and then the villain was embedded in the far wall, 30 feet away, unconscious, with a fist-shaped depression in his chest armor. The other 2 didn't even get a chance to turn around. 2 impacts. 2 bodies hitting water. Silence. Tsuyu blinked. She looked to her right. Izuku stood on the water's surface, literally on top of it, his boots barely dimpling the surface, like the water itself didn't dare let him sink. He looked at her. His sunglasses reflected her wide eyes. You should leave. He was gone before she could respond. Black after image. Ripple on the water. Nothing. Ribbit, Tsuyu said quietly. It was all she could manage. In the ruins zone, Bakugo and Kirishima had been fighting back-to-back against a group of villains. Bakugo was doing most of the damage, explosions ripping through the air, his face twisted in his usual mixture of rage and excitement. Kirishima hardened his body and tanked hits, buying Bakugo space to work. They were winning. Barely, but winning. Then the remaining villains just dropped. One by one, like puppets with their strings cut. Bakugo detonated an explosion toward a villain who was already falling, unconscious before the blast even reached him. The concussive wave scattered debris but hit nobody standing. Bakugo spun around. What the? Izuku stood on top of a collapsed pillar 20 feet away, arms crossed, coat moving in the dust-laden air, looking down at Bakugo like a king glancing at a peasant who had momentarily caught his attention. Bakugo stared. He knew that face. He knew those freckles. He knew that green hair. But everything else was wrong. The posture was wrong. The energy was wrong. The fact that the quirkless nobody he'd spent his entire childhood looking down on was standing over him in a black trench coat with an aura that made his palms itch and his instincts scream was very, very wrong. Midoriya? Izuku looked at him. The ghost of a smile crossed his face. Thin, cold, amused in a way that carried absolutely zero warmth. Bakugo. He said the name like it was a footnote, like it was a word he barely remembered from a life he'd already moved past. Then he vanished, and Bakugo was left standing in the ruins with his fists clenched and his chest heaving, and a feeling in his gut that he had never experienced before. It took him a long time to realize what the feeling was. Fear. Kirishima looked at him. Dude, who was that? Bakugo didn't answer. His teeth ground together hard enough to hurt. In the landslide zone, Orochi had handled his villains with characteristic efficiency. They were frozen. All of them. Encased in ice from the waist down, shivering, defeated. He stood among them, mist rising from his right side, his expression flat. He had heard the impacts, felt the shockwaves, seen the brief flashes of black blur moving between zones at speeds that made his brain hurt trying to track. He hadn't seen the person responsible up close, but he felt them. An overwhelming presence that pressed against his senses like standing too close to a bonfire. Impossible to ignore, impossible to look at directly. Todoroki filed it away. His face didn't change, but his right hand, the ice hand, was shaking slightly, and he chose to believe it was from the cold. In 70 seconds, the USJ attack was over. Every villain was down, dead, unconscious, or broken beyond the ability to fight. The facility was a wreck. Craters in the floor, walls destroyed, zones devastated by the shockwaves of Izuku's strikes. But the students were alive. Aizawa was alive, though badly injured. 13 was alive. Izuku stood in the center of the plaza. Around him, the aftermath of devastation. He checked his sleeves, adjusted his coat, brushed a fleck of concrete dust off his shoulder. The students of Class 1A gathered on the main staircase, some of them helped by others, all of them staring at the figure below. 20 students, 20 quirks, and every single one of them looking at the person in the black coat with an expression that ranged from shock to awe to something that looked a lot like existential crisis. Momo Yaoyorozu's analytical mind was running at full speed, trying to categorize what she had just witnessed, and failing. Speed that exceeds any recorded quirk. Strength that surpasses the Nomu, a creature designed to match All Might. Single strike takedowns on every target. And he didn't even look like he was trying. She opened her mouth to say something. Nothing came out. Denki Kaminari stood with his mouth hanging open, electricity sparking uselessly from his fingertips. Did anyone else just see what I saw? Or did I short-circuit again? Kyoka Jiro's earphone jacks were extended, unconsciously trying to gather more information about the stranger below. I can hear his heartbeat, she whispered. It hasn't changed from the moment he walked in to right now. The same. It's the same. That's impossible, Ida said, his glasses cracked from a villain's hit, his voice strained. He just fought dozens of opponents and his heart rate is unchanged? I'm telling you what I hear. Fumikage Tokoyami stood at the back, dark shadow trembling against his body. The sentient quirk, which feared nothing in the darkness, was cowering. Actually cowering. Dark Shadow, Tokoyami murmured. What's wrong? I don't like him, Dark Shadow whispered back. I don't like him. Something about him is wrong. He feels like he's the top of something. Everything else is underneath. Ochako Uraraka was pale. Her hands were shaking. She had seen the Nomu, the hulking, terrifying monster that had broken their teacher, get kicked across an entire building by someone who looked like a teenager in a cool jacket. Her brain was trying to reconcile what she knew about the world with what she had just seen. And the math wasn't working. Bakugo had made it back to the group. He stood at the edge, arms crossed, not speaking. His eyes were locked on Izuku. His jaw was tight enough to crack teeth. Every explosion he'd ever made, every victory he'd ever claimed, every ounce of superiority he'd ever felt, all of it suddenly seemed very, very small. Todoroki had arrived silently. He stood apart from the group as he always did. But his mismatched eyes were fixed on Izuku with an intensity that was unusual even for him. He was thinking, calculating, trying to understand how someone could move like that, hit like that, and show absolutely nothing on their face. Aizawa, lying on the ground, propped up on his good arm, looked at the boy in the black coat and felt something he hadn't felt since his early days on the underground circuit, The cold, gut-level recognition that he was looking at someone who operated on a completely different level of existence. He tried to activate erasure. His eyes burned red. He locked onto Izuku. Nothing happened. His abilities didn't waver, didn't flicker, didn't dim, because there was nothing to erase. Izuku Midoriya did not have a quirk. What he had was something entirely outside the framework that Hero Society understood. Aizawa's blood went cold. And then the real doors opened. Not the ones Izuku had blown off their hinges. The emergency entrance. The heavy-duty, reinforced emergency entrance that was designed to hold against virtually anything. It burst open, and through it came the symbol of peace. All Might was in his muscle form, full power, veins bulging, smile gone. His eyes were dark, serious, focused, the way they only got when something genuinely threatened his worldview. He had heard the emergency call, he had felt the shockwaves from outside the building, he had run here at full speed, expecting the worst. What he found was the aftermath. Villains everywhere, broken, frozen, unconscious, dead. The Nomu embedded in the mountain zone. Shigaraki's body on the plaza floor. Kurogiri's metal brace crumpled and empty. His students on the staircase shaken but alive. Aizawa injured but breathing, and in the center of it all, a young man in a black coat with his hands in his pockets. All Might looked at him. Izuku looked at All Might. The temperature in the room dropped. Not literally, but emotionally, psychologically. The air between these two people became heavy, with something that everyone in the building could feel. A gravitational pull between two forces that the universe was never supposed to put in the same room. "I am here," All Might declared, his voice booming through the dome. Izuku didn't flinch, didn't react. He reached into his coat, slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone was watching, and pulled out a sleek pocket watch. Silver, engraved. He clicked it open, checked the time, snapped it shut, and smiled. Slow, controlled, the kind of smile that belonged on the face of a chess player who could see the board 12 moves ahead. 7 minutes, Izuku said. His voice carried with perfect clarity, calm, measured, every syllable placed with intention. 7 minutes is all I can spare to play with you. All Might's eyes narrowed. He studied the young man, something about the face, the green hair, the freckles. Recognition flickered. Distant, uncertain, a rooftop, steam. A boy with a yellow backpack and too much hope in his eyes. It couldn't be. "Who are you?" All Might asked. His voice was steady, but there was a thread in it. A thin thread of something that might have been unease. Izuku tilted his head. "You've already forgotten? I'm hurt." He removed his sunglasses, folded them, placed them in his breast pocket. His eyes hit the room like a physical force. Glowing red. Vertical slits. Inhuman. Beautiful in the way that a predator is beautiful, in the way that makes your hindbrain scream even as your conscious mind is fascinated. Students gasped. Bakugo's hands detonated involuntarily, small explosions popping from his palms. Todoroki's ice crept forward unconsciously, spreading across the floor. Uraraka stepped back. Ida's engines revved. All Might's eyes widened. "Young? Midoriya? That name means nothing to me anymore," Izuku said. "But yes, I'm the boy you abandoned on that rooftop, the quirkless child you told couldn't be a hero, the one you dismissed and forgot about in the same breath." He put his hands behind his back. His posture was perfect, chin raised, shoulders square, every line of his body communicating a confidence so absolute it transcended arrogance. "You were right, by the way. I couldn't be a hero. Heroes are bound by the limitations of their quirks, their society, their morality. I chose to be something greater." All Might's fists clenched. The muscles in his arms tensed. He felt the weight of the situation settling onto his shoulders. The realization that this was wrong, that something had gone very wrong, and that the boy he had failed on that rooftop had become something that made every alarm in his body fire at once. "What have you done to yourself?" "I evolved," Izuku said simply. "Something you and your precious hero society will never be capable of." "Young man, don't." The word cut through the air. Sharp. Final. The kind of single syllable that shuts down a conversation by sheer force of presence. "You had your chance to talk to me. You wasted it. Now, I'm curious." Izuku shifted his weight slightly. A micro-movement. The kind that combat veterans recognize as the prelude to violence. "Show me what the symbol of peace is made of." "You have 7 minutes." All Might moved first. Texas smash. The #1 hero pulled his fist back and threw the most famous punch in the world. The air compressed ahead of his knuckles. The shockwave alone stripped the concrete floor in a wide cone, turning solid ground into flying debris. Windows shattered across the entire facility. Students hit the deck. The pressure wave would have flattened a building. Izuku tilted his head a fraction of an inch to the left. The shockwave screamed past his face. His hair moved in the blast. His coat rippled. One of his green strands shifted position. That was it. The punch whiffed. All Might's eyes went wide. Izuku was still standing in the same spot. Same posture, same expression. He hadn't moved his feet. He hadn't dodged. He had tilted his head, maybe 2 inches of total movement, and the most powerful punch on the planet had missed him by the width of a coin. Izuku said, slow. All Might pressed forward. Detroit Smash, a downward hammer fist that cratered the ground where Izuku had been standing. Had been, past tense, because by the time the fist connected with concrete, Izuku had, phantom, dashed, relocated 6 feet to the left, standing with his arms crossed, watching the symbol of peace destroy the floor. All Might spun. Another punch. Another. Each one faster, harder, more desperate. He was throwing combinations now. Lefts, rights, uppercuts, hooks. A blinding barrage of strikes that moved the air like a hurricane, that kicked up dust and debris, that cracked the ground with every miss. Izuku moved through them. He didn't block. He didn't parry. He simply existed in the spaces between All Might's fists, weaving, leaning, stepping, flowing through the barrage like smoke through a chain-link fence. His movements were minimal, economic. He moved only exactly as much as he needed to, and not a millimeter more. And he did it with his hands behind his back, like he was taking a walk through a park, and the explosions of force happening inches from his body were mildly interesting weather. You're sluggish, Izuku said flatly, leaning away from a right cross that would have decapitated a normal person. Age and injury have taken their toll. He was reading All Might's movements. Every punch, every shift in weight, every micro-expression of effort on that massive face, Izuku was cataloging it all in real time, processing combat data faster than any computer, analyzing the symbol of peace's fighting style, and finding every flaw, every gap, every weakness. And there were many. All Might threw a massive straight right, the kind of punch that had ended entire battles, that had brought down villains who thought themselves gods. Full power, holding nothing back. Izuku caught it, open palm. He caught All Might's fist in his hand and stopped it dead. The impact shockwave blew outward in a ring. Concrete, dust, debris, shattered glass, all of it spiraling away from the point of contact. But the fist didn't move. Izuku's arm didn't buckle. His feet didn't slide. He held All Might's punch like he was holding a door open for someone. The silence that followed was the loudest sound in the building. All Might stared at his own fist, wrapped in the grip of a teenager's hand, and felt something break inside him. Something that had been holding his confidence together. Something that had let him believe for all these years that as long as he was standing, everything would be okay. Izuku squeezed. All Might's fingers creaked. The number one hero actually winced. There, Izuku said, and his red eyes locked onto All Might's with an intensity that made the air between them vibrate. Found it. He let go of the fist. And in the same motion, faster than even All Might could react to, he drove his open palm forward in a cobra strike aimed directly at All Might's left side. At the scar. At the wound. At the secret that the symbol of peace had been hiding from the entire world for years. The strike landed clean. The sound it made was sharp and wet and wrong. The force transferred through All Might's body like electricity, bypassing his muscle, bypassing his guard, hitting the old injury with pinpoint precision that a surgeon would have envied. All Might's eyes bulged. His mouth opened. Blood, bright red, arterial, unmistakable, sprayed from between his teeth in a cough that he couldn't stop. His legs buckled, his knees hit the ground, the symbol of peace on his knees. In front of his students, the sound that came from Class 1A was horrible. A collective gasp that contained 20 different flavors of disbelief, horror, and the shattering of something they had all, on some level, believed was unbreakable. All Might, the pillar, the wall, the smile that told the world everything was fine, was on his knees, coughing blood, in front of a boy in a black coat who hadn't even gotten his hands dirty. Momo's hands were over her mouth. Tears were forming in her eyes. Ida was frozen. His entire body locked up like his engine had stalled. Uraraka was shaking. Her eyes were wide and wet, and she couldn't look away, couldn't process, couldn't breathe. Bakugo moved. He didn't think about it. He didn't plan it. The sight of All Might, his hero, his idol, the standard he measured himself against, brought down by the person he had spent his entire childhood treating as less than nothing. Something in Bakugo's wiring bypassed every rational circuit and went straight to violence. He launched himself off the staircase, explosions roaring from both palms, propelling him forward like a human missile. He closed the distance in under 2 seconds, moving faster than he'd ever moved in his life, and fired a point-blank explosion directly at Izuku's back. The blast hit fire, smoke, concussive force. The explosion was massive. Bakugo had put everything into it, like every drop of nitroglycerin in his palms, a blast that would have destroyed a car. The smoke cleared. Izuku stood in the same spot, unburned, undamaged. His coat didn't even have a scorch mark. He turned his head slowly, looking over his shoulder at Bakugo, who was still hovering behind him, palms smoking, eyes wild. "You're merely postponing the inevitable." Izuku turned. He moved so fast that Bakugo's eyes couldn't track the motion. One instant, Izuku was facing away from him, and the next instant, a hand was around his throat. A single hand, gripping with pressure that Bakugo immediately realized could crush his windpipe with the effort of closing a book. Bakugo fired more explosions, point blank. Against Izuku's arm, his chest, his face, each blast detonated with furious, desperate power. Izuku didn't blink. He lifted Bakugo off the ground with one arm. Bakugo's feet dangled. His hands gripped Izuku's wrist, trying to pry himself free. His quirk fired again and again, explosions blooming against Izuku's skin and sliding off like water. Izuku looked at him with the same expression someone might use when examining an insect on a windowsill. Then he tossed him. He flicked his arm and Bakugo flew, spinning through the air, crashing into the concrete staircase hard enough to crack the steps, sliding to a stop in a heap of dust and bruised pride. Bakugo didn't get up quickly. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in his life, the word weak wasn't something he said about other people. It was something he felt in his own body. Todoroki moved next. Ice erupted from his right foot. A massive wave of frost that raced across the floor toward Izuku, coating everything in its path in a shell of ice several feet thick. It was the same move that had frozen an entire arena in seconds. The ice reached Izuku and crawled up his boots. It started forming around his legs. Izuku looked down at it. He flexed. The ice shattered, exploded outward in a spray of crystals that caught the light like diamonds. Todoroki's attack, the attack that had never failed, the power that Endeavor had bred into a weapon, broke apart like glass. Todoroki's eyes widened. For someone as controlled as him, that was the equivalent of a scream. Izuku didn't even address him. He looked back at All Might, who was struggling to his feet, blood still dripping from his lips, his muscle form flickering, the massive body shrinking momentarily before swelling back, like a light bulb about to burn out. "I expected more," Izuku said. "But I suppose this is what passes for the world's greatest hero, a dying man clinging to a power that's already leaving him." All Might stood, fully. His fists came up. His smile, that famous world-saving smile, forced itself onto his face that, though it was strained, though the muscles around it trembled. "I don't know what you've become," All Might said, his voice thick with blood and determination. "But as long as I stand, I am the wall that protects these students." "A wall," Izuku repeated. He considered the word. "Walls crumble. That's what they're designed to do. Hold until they can't. And you, All Might, have been crumbling for a very long time." All Might charged. It was everything. Every ounce of power left in the failing body of the symbol of peace. A punch that was supposed to remind the world why he stood at the top. A punch fueled by desperation, by duty, by the hope that he could still be enough. Izuku sidestepped it, smoothly, almost gently. The punch cratered the floor behind him, sending a spiderweb of cracks across the plaza. All Might spun, threw another. Izuku parried it, one hand, open palm deflecting the fist downward. All Might's momentum carried him forward, off balance. Izuku drove a knee into All Might's gut. The impact folded the number one hero in half. More blood sprayed. All Might's form flickered again. Longer this time, the skinny silhouette visible for a full second before the muscle form surged back. Then Izuku, Phantom dashed behind him and delivered a jaguar kick, a spinning heel strike to the base of All Might's spine. The impact sent All Might sliding forward across the concrete, his massive feet carving trenches in the floor, until he hit the far wall and stopped. All Might's form flickered one final time, and didn't come back. The massive body deflated, the muscles vanished, the towering frame collapsed inward like a balloon with the air let out. What hit the ground wasn't the symbol of peace. It was Toshinori Yagi, thin, skeletal, broken. Coughing blood and heaving, ragged gasps, 20 students saw it happen. 20 students saw their idol, the unbreakable, unbeatable, ever-smiling pillar of everything they believed in, crumble into a dying old man in a suit that was suddenly 10 sizes too big. The reactions were not uniform, but they were universal. Horror, confusion, tears, denials. Some of them spoke. Most of them couldn't. Uraraka sobbed openly. Ida's glasses fell off. Momo clutched her chest like something inside it had stopped working. Tokoyami wrapped dark shadow around himself like a blanket. Kirishima, who prided himself on being unshakable, on being the hardest man in the room, felt tears running down his hardened cheeks and didn't know how to stop them. Bakugo stared from the stairs. His face was a mask of something that wasn't anger. It was deeper than anger. It was the look of someone watching the foundation of their entire worldview get pulled out from under them like a tablecloth. Todoroki looked at the skeletal All Might, then at Izuku, then back. His mind was racing behind those mismatched eyes, connecting dots, redrawing the map of everything he thought he understood about power and strength, and what it meant to be the strongest. Aizawa, from the ground, watched Izuku with the one eye that wasn't swollen shut. His brain had stopped trying to analyze and had shifted to a more basic mode, threat assessment. And the assessment was bad. Very, very bad. Izuku pulled his pocket watch from his coat, clicked it open, glanced at it. "Things are really getting interesting now," he murmured. Click. The watch snapped shut. "But it's time to go." He placed the sunglasses back on his face, adjusted them with one finger, looked out over the destroyed USJ, the craters, the bodies, the ice, the blood, the crying students, the broken heroes, and then he was gone. Phantom dash. Black after image. Silence. Silence. The space where Izuku Midoriya had been standing was empty, like he had never been there at all. Like the past 7 minutes had been a collective hallucination shared by everyone in the building. But the damage was real. The bodies were real. The blood was real. All Might, Toshinori Yagi, lay on the ground in his true form, exposed, vulnerable, defeated, and every student in Class 1A had seen it. The USJ fell completely silent. Then from somewhere in the back of the group, Kaminari's voice. What the actual hell just happened? Nobody answered, because nobody knew. The aftermath of the USJ was a storm. News broke within hours. Villains attacked UA, casualties reported. Symbol of peace hospitalized. The details were locked down tight. The government, the Hero Public Safety Commission, the school board, everyone scrambled to control the narrative, to keep the worst of it from reaching the public. They failed. Of course they failed. 20 traumatized students went home to 20 families, and within 24 hours, the whispers were everywhere. All Might lost. The words spread through hero society like poison. All Might lost. The man who had never been beaten, who had smiled through every battle, who had stood as the unchallenged peak of human power for 3 decades. He lost. To a teenager nobody had ever heard of, in a black coat with glowing red eyes and speed that made light look lazy, the Hero Public Safety Commission held emergency meetings behind closed doors. The top brass of every major hero agency was briefed. Endeavor, the number 2 hero, who had spent his entire career chasing All Might's shadow, sat in his office and read the classified report 3 times. Then he burned it. Because the idea that some unknown child had done what he couldn't, bring All Might to his knees, made something inside him twist in a way he couldn't name. The students were debriefed individually. Each one gave their account. The accounts were consistent in their inconsistency. Nobody could fully describe what they'd seen because what they'd seen defied description. He was fast, was the most common phrase, repeated in variations. Impossibly fast, unreal fast. Fast in a way that didn't seem like speed, but more like teleportation. Bakugo's debrief was 3 sentences long. He picked me up by the throat. My explosions didn't do anything. He threw me like garbage. He left the room before they could ask follow-up questions. He went home and punched the wall of his bedroom until his knuckles bled. Then he punched it more. Todoroki's debrief was calm, analytical, and deeply unsettling to the people who read it. He broke through my ice by flexing. His speed exceeded anything I've ever seen, including my father at full power. His fighting style was precise and adaptive. He targeted All Might's injury with knowledge he shouldn't have had. He is, without question, the most dangerous individual I have ever encountered. When asked for a threat assessment, Todoroki paused. If he decided to attack a city instead of a building, I don't think anyone could stop him. The room went very quiet after that. Aizawa spent 2 weeks in the hospital. Broken arm, fractured orbital bone, concussion, multiple lacerations. He didn't talk about Izuku. When pressed by detectives, he said only one thing. My quirk didn't work on him. Erasure had no effect. Whatever he is, it's not a quirk. That sentence generated more classified memos than everything else combined. Detective Naomasa Tsukauchi, All Might's friend, a man whose quirk was a human lie detector, sat in Toshinori Yagi's hospital room a week after the USJ. All Might lay in the bed looking every year of his age and then some. The machines beeped steadily. His gaunt face was bruised. His torso was bandaged where the old injury had been aggravated by Izuku's Cobra Strike. His name is Izuku Midoriya, Tsukauchi said, reading from a folder. Age 15, born quirkless, registered as missing 7 months ago. Mother, Inko Midoriya. Father, Hisashi Midoriya, currently abroad. Attended Aldera Junior High. Academic records are good, no criminal record, no known associations. He simply vanished, and then reappeared at the USJ with abilities that defy classification. All Might stared at the ceiling. I met him, he said quietly, 7 months ago, on a rooftop. Tsukauchi's pen stopped. He asked me if he could be a hero without a quirk, and I told him no. The room was quiet except for the beeping machines. That was a mistake, All Might said. It was the most understated thing he'd ever said in his life. Tsukauchi leaned forward. All Might, what are we dealing with? The symbol of peace, the man who had smiled through battles with the most dangerous villain in history, looked at his friend with hollow eyes. I don't know, Tsukauchi. But I felt that kind of power only once before, and the last time I felt it, it almost killed me. He was talking about All for One. The implication landed on Tsukauchi like a physical weight. You're saying this boy is on that level? All Might's silence was the answer. While Hero Society scrambled and panicked and held meetings about meetings, Izuku Midoriya returned to his laboratory. He hung his coat on a hook. He placed his sunglasses on the workstation. He sat down and began analyzing the combat data he had collected. His body had performed flawlessly. The virus integration was complete and stable. His speed exceeded his own projections by 12%. His strength output was consistent with the upper theoretical limits he had calculated. His regeneration factor was functional. The minor impact damage from All Might's shockwaves had healed before he'd even registered it. He was everything he'd set out to become. And it was just the beginning. He pulled up a holographic display, a map of Japan's hero and villain power structures. Every major agency, every known criminal organization, every underground network. He had been building this database for months, and it was nearly complete. The Hero Public Safety Commission sat at the top of the hero side, the puppet masters who pulled the strings behind every hero ranking, every public narrative, every backroom deal. Beneath them, the heroes themselves. All Might at the top, Endeavor behind, and a cascade of lesser figures filling out the ranks. On the villain side, the League of Villains was decapitated. Shigaraki and Kurogiri were gone. But the man behind the League, the shadow, the presence, the ancient evil that Izuku's inherited memories told him about through the whispers of this world's history, was still out there. All for One. Izuku knew the name, knew the reputation, knew that somewhere in the darkness of the criminal underworld, an ancient villain with the power to steal and combine quirks was watching, waiting, pulling strings. That was a problem for later. For now, the board was set and the first piece had been moved. He turned his attention to the rest of his plans. The Ouroboros virus was perfected for his own physiology, but the global variant, the one that could be administered to the broader population, the one that would force humanity through the bottleneck of evolution and emerge on the other side as something better, that was still incomplete. He needed more data, more resources, more components, and he knew exactly where to find them. He pulled up a file labeled MHA AU, a Yakuza organization operating in the shadows of Hero Society, led by a man named Kai Chisaki, codename Overhaul. A man whose quirk could disassemble and reassemble matter at the molecular level. A man who was, at that very moment, developing a drug that could destroy quirks permanently. Izuku looked at the data and smiled. How convenient. But that was down the road. First, there was another name on his list. Another stop on the itinerary. A detour that would serve both as a data collection opportunity and a demonstration. Stain, the hero killer. A man who believed he was purifying Hero Society through murder. A man with conviction, with skill, with a philosophy that, while crude, at least recognized that the current system was rotten. He had been cutting down professional heroes for months, leaving bodies and making headlines. Izuku didn't agree with Stain's methods. They were blunt instruments applied to a problem that required a scalpel. But he respected the man's commitment. And he wanted to test something. He wanted to see if Stain could make him feel anything in a fight. Hosu City burned. The attack was coordinated. Nomu released into the streets, villains scattered among the chaos, the hero killer operating in the shadows while the city's defenses were stretched thin. 3 Nomu rampaged through downtown, each one a different model, each one designed for a different form of destruction. Buildings toppled, cars flew, citizens ran screaming through streets choked with smoke and debris. Heroes responded. Endeavor was there, the number 2 hero blazing through the city in a corona of hellfire, engaging the Nomu with a fury that seemed personal. Because it was. Every time the number 2 hero fought, it was personal. Every battle was a chance to prove he belonged at the top, that the void All Might had left. The void that had been made real at the USJ could be filled by flames and willpower. Manuel was there, fighting to protect the waterways. The flying hero native was down in an alley, pinned by blade wounds, bleeding out. And in a narrow street between 2 burning buildings, the hero killer worked. Stain moved through the smoke like a wraith. His tattered scarf trailed behind him. His bandaged face was pulled in a permanent snarl of righteous fury. The katana in his hand was stained with the blood of 3 heroes he'd cut down that night. He was focused, driven, operating on a level of violent conviction that made him one of the most dangerous close combat fighters in the country. He sensed the presence before he saw it. Something had entered his space. Not a hero. Heroes announce themselves consciously or unconsciously through noise, through movement, through the inherent need to be seen. This was different. This was quiet, contained, like a shadow had grown a spine and started walking. Stain spun and attacked, no hesitation. Katana leading, a horizontal slash aimed at throat height, moving at a speed that had killed pro heroes before they could blink. Izuku caught the blade between 2 fingers. The impact rang through the alley like a bell. The katana, hardened steel, lovingly maintained, sharp enough to shave atoms, stopped dead between Izuku's thumb and forefinger. The vibration traveled up Stain's arms and into his shoulders, and he felt, in that fraction of a second, the absurd, insulting, terrifying reality that this person had caught his killing blow with a pinch. Izuku looked at the blade between his fingers. Then he looked at Stain. The red glow of his eyes was visible through the dark lenses of his sunglasses, faint but unmistakable like embers in a shadow. "You preach about false heroes," Izuku said. His voice was a flat line, no aggression, no tension, just cold observation. But you fail to see the larger picture. Every day, humans come one step closer to self-destruction. Stain's eyes narrowed. He tried to pull the blade back. It didn't move. It was locked in Izuku's grip like it was welded there. Stain's free hand, the one holding a throwing knife, flashed forward. A stab aimed at the gap between Izuku's ribs. Fast. Practiced. The kind of move that worked on people who were distracted by the sword. Izuku flicked his wrist. The katana shattered. It didn't bend. Didn't crack. Shattered. Breaking into a dozen pieces that scattered across the alley floor with a musical tinkling. Stain's hand was suddenly holding a hilt with 3 inches of jagged steel left above the guard. The throwing knife reached Izuku's side. It hit the tactical armor underneath his coat and bounced off. It didn't scratch the surface. Izuku delivered a spinning roundhouse kick, a full rotation strike that started at his hip and ended with his heel impacting Stain's ribcage. The sound was bad. A deep, wet crack that echoed between the alley walls. Stain's ribs broke, multiple simultaneously, and his body was launched off its feet across the alley and into the brick wall on the opposite side. He hit the wall hard enough to crater it. The bricks cracked from the point of impact upward, a spiderweb of fractures climbing to the rooftop. Dust rained down. Stain's body stayed embedded in the broken wall for a moment. Wedged into the indentation his own impact had created. Before gravity pulled him down and he slid to the ground, he was conscious, barely. Blood ran from his mouth, his nose, the cuts on his arms, his ribs were shattered, his legs wouldn't move properly. But his eyes, those intense, fanatical, burning eyes, were still focused on the person who had put him in the wall. Who? Stain rasped. Who are you? Izuku straightened his coat, adjusted one cuff. He looked down at the hero killer with an expression that wasn't contempt. It was closer to acknowledgement, like he recognized the fire in Stain's eyes even as he dismissed the brain behind them. "I'm not destroying the world, Stain," Izuku said. "I'm saving it." He turned and walked toward the mouth of the alley. His boots clicked on the wet pavement. Behind him, Stain lay in the rubble, breathing in short, agonized gasps, staring at the retreating figure with an expression that no one had ever seen on his face before. Confusion. Complete, total confusion. Because in all his years of hunting heroes and preaching about the corruption of the system, Stain had never met someone who made his ideology feel small, irrelevant. Like a man ranting about local politics while someone else was rearranging the stars. Izuku emerged from the alley into the burning street. Hosu City raged around him. A Nomu rampaged 2 blocks away, hurling a bus through the side of a building. Sirens wailed. Heroes fought in the smoke. Civilians screamed. He stood on the sidewalk, hands in pockets, and watched the chaos with mild interest. A Nomu, the winged variant built for aerial assault, spotted him from above. It screeched and dove, talons extended, moving at a speed that would have made a fighter jet jealous. Izuku didn't look up. He raised one hand, palm open, aimed at the diving Nomu. The Nomu was 2 seconds from impact. Izuku caught it by the face. Mid-dive. His hand closed around its skull and stopped its entire momentum in an instant. The shockwave from the sudden deceleration shattered every window on the block. The Nomu's body swung forward like a pendulum, its legs flipping up past its head, until Izuku adjusted and slammed it face first into the pavement. The street cratered. A shockwave rippled outward, knocking over parked cars and sending debris flying. The Nomu twitched once in the crater and went still. Dead or disabled, the distinction was academic. 2 blocks over, Endeavor had just finished incinerating his own Nomu when the shockwave reached him. He turned, flames blazing around his body, and saw the crater. Saw the figure standing at the edge of it, a young man in a black coat, green hair, sunglasses, hands back in pockets, walking away from a dead Nomu like it was nothing. Endeavor's flames flickered. He had seen the USJ report. He had read Todoroki's debrief. He had dismissed it, partially, as the exaggerations of traumatized children. But here, in the burning streets of Hosu, watching someone walk away from a Nomu kill that had taken less time than a heartbeat, Endeavor felt something he hadn't felt since the last time he stood in All Might's shadow. Insignificance. He crushed the feeling. Burned it away with fury and pride and 30 years of refusing to acknowledge anyone's superiority. But it had been there. For 1 second, the number 2 hero had felt it. Izuku walked through Hosu City without hurrying. The chaos parted around him like water around a stone. Villains who crossed his path went down in single strikes. A wall of fire from a quirk-using arsonist split around him as he walked through it, the flames bending away from his body. A chunk of building falling from above hit his shoulder and crumbled into dust. He brushed it off. By the time he reached the other side of the city, the battle was winding down. Heroes were gaining ground. Emergency services were moving in. The damage was immense, but the worst was over. Izuku looked back at the burning skyline one last time. Stain had one thing right, he murmured to himself. This society is rotten, but he tried to cut out the disease with a knife. He turned away. I'll replace the entire organism. He vanished into the night. Phantom dash. Black afterimage. Gone. The Stain incident, as the media called it, changed things. The hero killer was found unconscious in an alley, his body broken, his katana shattered. He was arrested, hospitalized, and eventually imprisoned. But the narrative that emerged wasn't the one the authorities wanted. Stain didn't go down fighting heroes. Stain went down fighting something else, and the whispers that had started after the USJ grew louder. The Man in Black. That's what the underground called him. The forums, the villain networks, the dark corners of the internet where people discuss things that the mainstream news wouldn't touch. A figure in a black coat who had destroyed the League of Villains leadership in under a minute, humiliated All Might, and put the hero killer in the hospital without breaking a sweat. Nobody knew his name. Nobody knew his face. The sunglasses and the coat were all anyone could describe. Nobody knew his quirk, or if he even had one. The running theory on villain forums was that he was a government experiment gone wrong. The running theory on hero forums was that he was an alien. The running theory among the students of UA was that he was a nightmare they hadn't woken up from yet. Bakugo had stopped talking about the incident entirely. He trained harder than ever. Longer hours, more explosions, pushing his body until it broke and then pushing past that. But the anger had a different quality now. Before the USJ, Bakugo's rage had been the rage of someone at the top looking down. After the USJ, it was the rage of someone who had been shown exactly how far from the top he actually was. He remembered the hand around his throat, the absolute insulting ease of it. The way his explosions had detonated against Izuku's skin and done exactly nothing. And the look in those red eyes, the look that said, "You are beneath consideration." It ate at him. Every day. Every night. Every time he closed his eyes and saw those red glowing slits, Todoroki processed the USJ differently. He went quiet, quieter than usual, which was already very quiet. He trained with his ice side obsessively, pushing the output to new extremes, creating structures of frozen architecture that were beautiful in their complexity. But he also did something he had never done before. He started practicing with his fire, not because he had reconciled with his father, not because he had overcome his trauma, but because he had seen for the first time what true power looked like, and true power did not have the luxury of handicapping itself out of principle. If the man in the black coat was what the world was producing now, then Shoto Todoroki using only half his strength was a death sentence. He didn't tell anyone about this decision. He trained alone, in the dead of night, on the roof of the dormitory, and every time the flames erupted from his left side, he thought of red eyes behind dark glasses. Class 1A had changed. The energy was different. The usual competitive spirit and youthful excitement had been replaced with something heavier, an awareness that the world outside UA's walls was not the world they had been prepared for. The USJ had been their first real encounter with danger, and it should have taught them about villains and teamwork and the importance of heroes. Instead, it had taught them about something that existed outside the hero-villain binary entirely. Something that looked at both sides with equal disinterest and dismantled them with equal ease. Something that made All Might, their All Might, the strongest man alive, look mortal. Recovery Girl had healed the worst of the students' injuries. Aizawa returned to teaching with his arm in a cast and a darkness in his eyes that his students noticed but didn't comment on. He pushed them harder, faster. He cut the gentleness from his teaching style, what little there had been, and replaced it with an urgency that bordered on desperation, because Aizawa understood something the students didn't. He understood that what they had encountered at the USJ wasn't a villain. It wasn't a crisis. It was a paradigm shift. The world's power structure had just been rewritten in real time, and nobody at the top had a plan for it. 3 months passed. Izuku spent them working. The laboratory expanded, new rooms, new equipment, new systems. He refined the Ouroboros virus further, pushing it toward the global variant that would serve as the catalyst for forced evolution. He continued to collect data, hacking systems, monitoring hero agencies, tracking villain movements, building a picture of the world's power landscape with a level of detail that would have made intelligence agencies weep with envy. He was patient. Wesker had always been patient. The grand design required time, precision, and the willingness to let the pieces move into position before making the decisive play. The USJ and Hosu had been demonstrations, statements of capability, nothing more. The world knew he existed now. The world feared him. That was useful, but fear alone wouldn't reshape humanity. For that, he needed the final component, the quirk-destroying drug. Eri, a small girl with a horn on her head and a quirk that could rewind biological matter to a previous state, was the key. Her blood was the base ingredient for the drug that Overhaul had been developing, a drug that could permanently eliminate quirks from the human body. Izuku didn't care about destroying quirks. He cared about the mechanism, the delivery system. If a drug could target the quirk factor and shut it down, then a similar drug, or virus, could target the same genetic structure and rewrite it, replace it, upgrade it. Eri's blood, combined with Overhaul's research, combined with the Ouroboros framework, that was the equation. That was the formula for complete. Global saturation. He had been tracking the Shi Hasaikai for weeks, mapping their compound, identifying their members, cataloging their security measures. The Yakuza operated in the underground, but they were analog in a digital age, and Izuku's surveillance capabilities made their secrecy laughable. He knew the compound layout. He knew the rotation schedules. He knew where Overhaul slept, where the drug was manufactured, where the research was stored. He knew where Eri was. The heroes were closing in on the Hasaikai too. Slowly, bureaucratically, gathering evidence and building a case and coordinating a multi-agency raid that would probably take another month to execute. By the time they got there, Izuku would have already been and gone. He didn't plan extensively. He didn't recruit allies. He didn't build contingencies. He simply went. The Shi Hasaikai compound was built beneath an old estate on the outskirts of the city. Above ground, traditional Japanese architecture, wooden halls, Zen gardens. Below ground, a labyrinth of reinforced corridors, labs, storage rooms, and the heavily guarded chambers where Overhaul conducted his research. Izuku arrived at midnight. He stood at the front gate for a moment. The wooden doors were 3 inches thick, reinforced with steel on the inside, monitored by cameras, and guarded by 2 members of the Hasaikai, who stood on either side with the practiced stillness of people who had been doing this long enough to be bored by it. Izuku walked up to the gate. The guards saw him. Their hands moved toward weapons. "State your business," one of them started. Izuku pushed the gate. Both doors ripped off their hinges and launched inward, spinning through the courtyard and embedding themselves in the far wall of the estate with a crash that woke up the entire compound. The 2 guards were thrown backward by the blast of displaced air, tumbling across the courtyard like leaves. He walked through the opening, boots on stone, hands in pockets. The compound erupted around him. Alarms, shouts, the scramble of armed Yakuza members pouring out of doorways and hallways with guns, blades, and quirks at the ready. The first wave came from the left. 6 men with automatic weapons. They opened fire. Izuku Phantom dashed through the hail of bullets. After image hanging in the air. Bullets passing through empty space. He reappeared in the center of the group and struck 3 of them in one fluid motion. A palm thrust to the first, a back elbow to the second, a knee to the third. Each strike connected with a sound like a car crash. Bodies flew. The remaining 3 didn't get a chance to adjust their aim before Izuku's heel caught one under the chin and sent him spiraling into the ceiling, while the other 2 caught simultaneous back fists that dropped them where they stood. 6 seconds. 6 men down. He kept walking, deeper into the compound, down the stairs, into the underground. The Yakuza threw everything at him. Quirk users with body-hardening mutations stood in his path. He punched through them like they were made of paper. A villain with a strength-enhancing quirk charged at him with a roar. Izuku sidestepped, grabbed his arm, and threw him through 2 walls. A man who could generate razor-sharp projectiles from his body fired a barrage. Izuku walked through it, the projectiles bouncing off his chest and arms without penetrating. The samurai edge came out. He drew the handgun from his hip in a motion, so practiced it looked like a magic trick, the weapon appearing in his hand as if it had always been there. The gun barked twice. 2 guards at the end of a hallway dropped. Each one hit center mass with precision that made the word marksmanship feel inadequate. He holstered it, kept walking. The 8 expendables, Overhaul's elite guard, stood in his way. Rappa came first, the brawler. The man who lived for fighting, who could throw punches so fast they looked like a machine gun made of fists. He grinned at Izuku with the excitement of a dog that had just been thrown a bone. Finally, someone worth hitting, he charged, fists flying. A blur of raw kinetic violence. Izuku caught the first punch, then the second, then the third. He was catching Rappa's punches one after another, each one caught in an open palm, his body absorbing the tremendous force without moving an inch. Rappa's grin faltered. He threw faster, harder. His arms were a blur. Izuku caught every single one. Then he pulled Rappa forward and headbutted him. The impact cracked Rappa's skull and dropped him like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The brawler hit the floor and didn't move. Tengai threw up a barrier, a dome of pure defensive energy that was supposed to be impenetrable. Izuku punched it once. The barrier shattered like glass. Tengai went pale. A kick sent him into the wall, unconscious. Hojo charged in his Chimera form, enhanced strength, speed, and durability. He lasted 4 seconds. Izuku dismantled him with 3 strikes. Gut, jaw, temple. Out, Taibabe tried to eat through Izuku's coat. His teeth shattered on the armor underneath. Izuku looked down at him with something close to bewilderment, then flicked him in the forehead. The flick launched Tabe down the hallway and through a door. Setsuno, Hojo, Tabe, each one went down in seconds. Shinnomoto tried to use his confession quirk, the one that forced people to speak the truth. "What do you want?" Nomoto shouted, his quirk active, his voice carrying the compulsion. Izuku felt the tug of the quirk. A small, irritating pressure in his mind, like a mosquito trying to bite through steel. "I want everything," Izuku said calmly, without resistance, because it was the truth. Then he phantom dashed forward and put Nomoto down with a single strike. Rikia, the massive enforcer, blocked the hallway with his enormous body, his vitality-stealing quirk crackling around him like an aura. Izuku drew the samurai edge. One shot. Between the eyes. Rikia's head snapped back, and his massive body toppled like a felled tree. Mimic, the quirk user who controlled the compound structure, who could merge with and manipulate the walls, floors, and ceilings, made his play. The entire underground shifted. Walls closed in. The floor dropped. The ceiling came down. Corridors twisted and reformed, trying to crush, trap, disorient. Izuku moved through it all. He was too fast for the compound to catch. Every wall that closed, he was already past. Every floor that dropped, he was already jumping. Every corridor that twisted, he phantom, dashed through the distortion and emerged on the other side. It was like watching water flow through a maze, unstoppable, inevitable, finding every gap. Mimic screamed in frustration, pouring more of himself into the compound, reshaping entire sections in real time. Izuku responded by punching through a load-bearing wall so hard that the resulting collapse cascaded through 3 floors of the underground and opened a direct path to the deepest level. He dropped through the rubble, landed on his feet, dust settling around him, and there, in the deepest room, was Overhaul. Kai Chisaki stood in his laboratory. The plague mask covered his face. His golden eyes burned above it. His gloved hands, the hands that could disassemble and reassemble anything he touched, were shaking. Not with fear, with fury. He had heard every impact, every collapse, every scream. He had felt his compound, his fortress, his kingdom, get dismantled piece by a single person walking through it like it was a house of cards. "You have no idea what you've walked into," Chisaki said. His voice was tight, controlled. But the control was a thread stretched to its limit. "I am Overhaul. I will break you down to your component atoms and rebuild you as a warning." Izuku stood in the doorway. He took in the room, the lab equipment, the storage units, the briefcase on the table, the research notes, the vials of the completed quirk-destroying drug. He looked at Overhaul. "Threats from insects," he said. "How tedious." Overhaul slammed both hands on the ground. His quirk activated. The floor erupted. Walls, ceiling, ground, everything in the room was disassembled and reassembled in an instant, reforming into a forest of massive stone spikes that fired at Izuku from every direction. Up, down, left, right. A 3-dimensional storm of piercing stone, each spike moving at lethal speed, each one aimed with the precision of Overhaul's will. The room became a death trap. The air filled with the grinding roar of moving stone, the crack of spikes colliding where they missed, the dust and debris of a space tearing itself apart and rebuilding into a weapon. Izuku phantom dashed. Black afterimage. Gone. The spikes punched through empty air. He reappeared 3 feet to the left. Phantom dashed again. 6 feet up, again behind a pillar. Again, above Overhaul. He was moving through the spike field like a ghost, each phantom dash carrying him through the smallest gaps in the onslaught, each relocation so fast that Overhaul's quirk couldn't track him. Overhaul screamed and poured more power into the assault. The entire room was moving now. Every surface, every molecule, disassembling and reassembling in a continuous storm of destruction. It was the full power of his quirk unleashed without restraint, the power that had made him the leader of the Yakuza, the power that had terrorized the criminal underworld. Izuku appeared directly in front of him. One instant, Overhaul was surrounded by his own power, protected by a storm of reassembling matter, and the next instant there were red eyes inches from his face and a hand closing around his jaw. Izuku's grip was iron. His fingers pressed into Overhaul's face, cracking the plague mask. Chisaki's hands came up, reaching for Izuku's arm, trying to make contact, trying to activate his quirk, trying to disassemble the person holding him. His fingers touched Izuku's coat. Nothing happened. His quirk activated. He felt it fire. Felt the disassembly protocol initiate, but Izuku's biology simply refused. The virus in his cells recognized the foreign intrusion and neutralized it, a molecular-level immune response that treated Overhaul's quirk the same way it would treat a mild irritant. The disassembly field hit Izuku's cellular structure and bounced off like a wave hitting a cliff. Overhaul's golden eyes went wide above the cracked mask. Impossible. My quirk. It should. Izuku lifted him off the ground by his face and drove him straight down. The impact cratered the concrete floor. The plague mask shattered completely, fragments of white ceramic scattering across the rubble. Overhaul's body went limp in the center of a spider web of cracked stone. His eyes were glassy. His hands twitched at his sides, still reaching for something to disassemble, still trying to assert control over a situation that had left him behind minutes ago. Izuku stood. He looked down at the broken Yakuza boss. Then he turned to the table. The briefcase was there. He opened it. Inside, rows of completed quirk-destroying drug vials, each one a perfect amber color, each one representing months of research and an untold amount of suffering, inflicted on a small girl with a horn on her head. To the briefcase, the research notes. Stacks of them. Everything Overhaul had learned about quirk factor manipulation, about Ares' rewind quirk, about the mechanism by which quirks could be targeted and eliminated. Izuku picked up the briefcase. He gathered the research notes. He placed them inside his coat. Then he reached into a separate compartment on the table and found what he was really looking for. Samples. Ares' blood. Stored in sealed vials, refrigerated, preserved with the same care that Overhaul applied to everything he deemed valuable. He held one of the vials up. The blood was dark red, almost black, and there was something alive in it. A faint shimmer, a biological energy that even the naked eye could detect. The rewind quirk encoded at the cellular level, the power to turn back time on a living body, the power to undo evolution itself, or, in the right hands, to accelerate it. In his other hand, he held a vial of Ouroboros. Black and gold, swirling, alive with potential. 2 vials, 2 keys. One locked the door. The other opened it. He placed both in his coat. Then he found Eri. She was in a room at the back of the lab. Small, bare, a mattress on the floor and bandages on a shelf. She sat in the corner, arms wrapped around her knees, her horns small and white against her pale skin. Her eyes, large, red, terrified, stared at the door when it opened. Izuku stood in the doorway. His sunglasses were on. His coat was dusty from the fight. He looked at the small girl and something that wasn't Wesker, something that was still beneath everything, Izuku Midoriya, moved behind his eyes. He crouched down, slowly, no sudden movements. He was still wearing the coat, the glasses, the gear. He still looked like the most dangerous person in the world. But his voice, when he spoke, was different, softer, controlled, still, always controlled, but with something underneath it that he didn't usually show. "You're safe now." Eri stared at him. Her eyes were wide with the kind of fear that comes from years of abuse, from being treated as a resource rather than a person, from having her body used as a factory for weapons. Is he gone?" she whispered. "He will never touch you again." She looked at him for a long time, then slowly she reached out one small hand. Izuku took it. Gently. The same hand that had punched through a Nomu, shattered a katana, and cracked All Might's secret. That hand held a little girl's fingers, with a care that would have stunned anyone who had seen him fight. He stood. She stood with him. "We're leaving," he said. He carried her out of the compound, through the rubble, over the unconscious bodies, past the destroyed gates. She clung to his coat with both hands, her face pressed against his chest, her eyes closed. She didn't look at any of it. She didn't need to. Outside, the night air was cool. The stars were out. The compound smoked behind them. Izuku looked down at the girl in his arms. She was already asleep. Exhaustion, relief, and the first feeling of safety she had experienced in years pulling her under. Something in his chest that he had thought the virus had killed stirred slightly. He pushed it down, filed it away. There was no room for sentiment in the grand design, but he carried her carefully, and when he phantom, dashed through the city, moving at speeds that should have turned the air to fire around them, the girl in his arms didn't feel a thing. He moved around her like the universe itself was making an exception. He left her at a hospital, placed her in a bed, left a note with her name and the words, "Protected, contact UA." Then he was gone. He returned to the laboratory, laid out the materials on his workstation, the briefcase, the research, the vials, Ares' blood, everything he needed. He worked for 72 hours straight. No sleep, no food. The virus didn't require it. His body operated at peak efficiency. Regardless, the Ouroboros sustaining his cells at a level that made normal biological needs irrelevant. The formula came together. Ares' rewind factor, the genetic key that could reverse biological change, was the missing link. When integrated into the Ouroboros framework, it didn't reverse evolution. It stabilized it. The original Ouroboros had been too aggressive. It evolved subjects so rapidly that their bodies couldn't adapt, resulting in monstrous mutation or death. But with the rewind factor acting as a governor, the virus could push biological change to the exact threshold of transformation and hold it there, evolving the subject to superhuman status while preventing the runaway mutation that had plagued every previous version. It was perfect. The liquid in the final vial was different from the original Ouroboros. It was brighter, gold and black, intertwined in a spiral that moved like DNA, like the double helix of a new species waiting to be born. Izuku held the vial up to the light. The glow illuminated his face. His red eyes reflected the gold. "Complete," he said softly. "Global. Saturation." The formula was ready. The delivery system would need to be massive, aerosol dispersal, waterborne, atmospheric, but the science was sound. With enough production capacity and the right deployment strategy, the virus could reach every corner of the planet, every human being, every cell, every strand of DNA. Those who were compatible, whose biology accepted the virus the way Izuku's had, would evolve. They would become something new, something beyond quirks, beyond the random lottery of genetic chance. They would be the foundation of a new world. Those who were incompatible would not survive the transition. Evolution had always been brutal. It had always been selective. It had always been indifferent to the wishes of the organisms it acted upon. Izuku wasn't changing the rules of nature. He was simply taking them out of nature's hands and putting them in his own. He placed the vial in a secure case, locked it, set it on the shelf. The project wasn't ready for deployment. Not yet. There were still components to gather, infrastructure to build, variables to account for. But the hardest part was done. The formula existed. The future existed. It was just a matter of time. He stood in his laboratory, the underground cathedral of steel and light that he had built from nothing, and looked at his reflection in a monitor's dark screen. Green hair, red eyes, freckles on a face that was still young but carried something ancient behind it. The ghost of a boy who had been told he couldn't be a hero. The shadow of a man who had believed he could be a god. And something new. Something that was both and neither. Something that the world had never produced before and might never produce again. He removed his sunglasses, set them on the workstation, looked at his eyes, really looked at them, in the dark screen. "The right to be a god," he said. His voice was quiet, certain. The voice of someone who had looked at every possible version of the future and chosen the one that terrified everyone else the most. "That right is now mine." He put the sunglasses back on. He straightened his coat. He ran one hand through his green hair and turned to face the wall of monitors displaying the state of the world. Hero rankings, crime statistics, population data, the quiet machinery of a civilization that didn't know it was living on borrowed time. He sat down. He began to work. Outside, above the streets, above the buildings, above the layers of concrete and infrastructure that separated his laboratory from the surface, the world kept turning. Heroes patrolled. Villains schemed. People went to school and work and came home and watched the news and worried about the same things they always worried about. They did not know about the laboratory. They did not know about the virus. They did not know about the boy who had become something else, something that sat beneath their city like a heartbeat, steady and patient and inevitable. But they felt it. On some level, in some primal corner of their collective unconscious, they felt that the world had shifted, that the ground beneath their feet was less stable than it had been a year ago, that the future they had taken for granted, the hero society, the quirk-driven civilization, the comfortable illusion of progress, was being quietly dismantled by someone they couldn't see, couldn't find, and couldn't stop. All Might felt it from his hospital bed, staring at the ceiling with hollow eyes, knowing that the boy he had failed was somewhere out there becoming something that made All for One look like a prelude. Bakugo felt it in his dorm room, hands smoking, teeth grinding, replaying the same moment over and over. Red eyes, a hand around his throat. The absolute crushing certainty that he had never mattered less. Todoroki felt it in the training grounds, fire and ice swirling around him in equal measure for the first time in his life, pushing himself toward a level he wasn't sure existed, driven by the memory of someone who had made the most powerful person he knew look like an amateur. Endeavor felt it in his office, flames burning low, reading reports that didn't add up and staring at a world that no longer made sense. The students of Class 1A felt it every time they trained, every time they suited up, every time someone mentioned the USJ and the room went quiet with the shared memory of something they couldn't explain and couldn't forget. The Hero Public Safety Commission felt it in every emergency meeting, every classified briefing, every late-night phone call about a threat they had no framework for understanding. And somewhere, deep beneath the city, in a laboratory that shouldn't exist, a young man with red eyes and a black coat sat in front of a wall of screens and watched the world that he was going to remake. He was patient. He was inevitable. He was Izuku Midoriya. He was Albert Wesker. He was the bridge between what humanity was and what humanity would become, and his 7 minutes with the old world were just getting started. The encrypted message arrived at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Izuku was running spectral analysis on the latest atmospheric dispersal models when his secondary communication array, the one buried inside 17 layers of rolling encryption, routed through satellite relays that officially belonged to a defunct weather monitoring station in the South Pacific, pinged. Once, a single pulse, clean, targeted, delivered through a channel that should not have existed because Izuku had built the encryption architecture himself, and no system on the planet should have been able to find it, let alone knock on its door. He stopped typing. His fingers hovered above the keyboard. The monitor reflected the faint red glow of his eyes in the blue light of the lab. He opened the message. 4 words. No signature, no return address, no metadata, stripped clean, delivered through a relay path so convoluted it would have taken a government cryptography division 6 months to untangle. A meeting between equals. Izuku read it twice. He leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked. The hum of the laboratory's machines filled the silence. Centrifuges spinning, cryogenic units breathing their cold exhalations, the steady pulse of data flowing across dozens of screens. He knew who had sent it. There was only one person in this world who operated at the level required to find this channel, and that person had been operating at that level for longer than most civilizations had been keeping records. All for One, the ancient villain, the shadow behind the shadow, the man who had spent centuries accumulating quirks like a collector accumulating rare coins, stealing them from the living, hoarding them in his own body, building a personal arsenal of stolen power that made him the single most dangerous individual in the history of quirk society. He had built the League of Villains. He had groomed Shigaraki Tomura as his successor. He had orchestrated attacks, manipulated governments, toppled heroes, and shaped the criminal underworld into an extension of his own will. And Izuku had killed his protege, dismantled his organization's leadership, and broken the symbol of peace. all within the span of a few months, without ever acknowledging that All for One existed. That, Izuku understood, would have gotten the old man's attention. He considered the message for exactly 3 seconds. His mind processed the implications at a speed that made conscious thought feel like an afterthought. The tactical angles, the strategic value, the risk assessment, the probability matrices. All for One wanted a meeting. That meant he was curious. Curious meant uncertain. Uncertain meant he had been watching, and what he had seen didn't fit neatly into the models he had been using to predict the world for the last 200 years. Good. Equals, Izuku said to himself, the word leaving his mouth with a faint, dry amusement that didn't reach his eyes. He adjusted his sunglasses, a habit, a ritual, the small physical gesture that marked the transition between thinking and deciding. How generous of him. He stood. He walked to the equipment wall and began selecting his gear with the unhurried precision of a man choosing which tools to bring to a job he had already finished in his head. The coat, the tactical armor, the samurai edge, loaded, holstered at his hip. He checked each item the way a musician checks their instrument before a performance, not because he doubted any of it, but because the ritual itself had value. Preparation was respect paid to the moment. He chose the location himself. He was not going to meet All for One in a basement, in a warehouse, in any enclosed space where the ancient villain's accumulated quirks could be leveraged against structural vulnerabilities. He chose an industrial district on the eastern edge of Musutafu, a sprawling expanse of abandoned factories and empty lots that had been scheduled for redevelopment 3 times and abandoned each time when the funding evaporated. Wide open, flat, no walls to close in, no ceilings to collapse, no choke points to funnel movement, a killing field disguised as a meeting ground. He arrived first. He always arrived first. Control of the space was control of the engagement, and Izuku controlled everything. He stood in the center of the open concrete expanse, 100 meters in every direction before the nearest structure, the sky above dark and cloudless, the city's distant lights painting the horizon in a dull orange glow. His hands were in his coat pockets. His posture was relaxed. The wind moved through the empty space and pushed his green hair across his forehead. He waited. 14 minutes later, the air changed. It didn't shift the way it did when a storm front moved in or when a powerful quirk activated nearby. It thickened. The atmospheric pressure increased by a fraction, barely enough to register on instruments, but enough for Izuku's enhanced senses to feel it pressing against his skin like invisible fingers. The temperature dropped 2 degrees. The distant city sounds seemed to muffle, as if the world itself was pulling back to make room for something that demanded space. They came from the north, a convoy of darkness moving across the industrial wasteland, figures emerging from the shadows between buildings, spreading out in a loose formation that communicated both military discipline and the kind of confidence that came from knowing you had overwhelming force at your disposal. The Nomu variants came first, 6 of them. Each one different from the USJ model, larger, more refined, more deliberately constructed. One was encased in what looked like organic armor, its body covered in overlapping plates of bone-white chitin. Another was built for speed, lean, elongated, its limbs too long for its torso, its movements carrying the twitchy energy of something designed to close distance before you could blink. A third was massive, 15 feet tall, shoulders like boulders, its exposed brain pulsing with a slow, rhythmic glow that suggested active cognitive enhancement. The remaining 3 were variations on the theme: strength, durability, specialized abilities, and each one a custom weapon built for a specific purpose. Behind the Nomu, a handful of human subordinates. High-tier villains, each one carrying the kind of power that would have made them headline threats in any other context. A woman whose body crackled with visible electromagnetic energy, the air around her ionizing in real time. A man whose shadow moved independently, stretching and coiling like a living thing. A figure wrapped in bandages whose mere presence seemed to warp the concrete beneath their feet. 3, 4, 5 of them, all for one's personal guard, the ones too valuable or too dangerous to have been assigned to the League's expendable operations. And behind them all, walking with the measured pace of someone who had been walking through the world longer than anyone alive could remember, was All for One. The life support suit was a thing of dark engineering. Black, sleek, covering the ruined body beneath it like a second skin. The mask, smooth, featureless, covering the face that All Might had destroyed years ago, reflected the distant city lights in its polished surface. Tubes ran from the suit's collar to the base of the skull, pumping whatever chemical cocktail kept the ancient villain's body functioning. The hands were gloved. The posture was straight, carried with the deliberate authority of someone who had been the most powerful person in any room he entered for 2 centuries. He radiated presence, the kind that bent reality around it, that made the air feel heavier, that pressed against Izuku's awareness like a weight on his chest. It was old power, deep power, the accumulated gravity of a life spent taking from others and adding their strength to his own. Izuku felt it, acknowledged it, and dismissed it. The convoy stopped 50 meters away. The Nomu variants spread into a semicircle. The subordinates took positions. All for One continued forward alone, walking across the open concrete with the steady pace of a man approaching his own dinner table. He stopped 10 meters from Izuku. The space between them felt electric. Silence held for 3 seconds. 5, 7. All for One spoke first. His voice came through the mask's modulator, smooth, deep, carrying the weight of someone who had been choosing words carefully for longer than most languages had existed. There was warmth in it, the warmth of a predator making itself approachable. "I've been watching you," All for One said. "Since the USJ. Since you tore through my protege like he was made of paper and broke the symbol of peace in front of his own students. I must confess, I was impressed. Genuinely impressed. Do you know how rare that is? For someone my age?" Izuku said nothing. He stood with his hands in his pockets and let the old man talk. "Shigaraki was a tool," All for One continued. "A useful one, crafted over years, shaped specifically to inherit my will and carry it forward. But tools break. I learned that lesson long before you were born. What matters is the hand that holds them." He paused. The featureless mask seemed to study Izuku, even though there were no eyes visible behind it. "You broke my tool. You destroyed my logistics network. You humiliated the man I spent decades positioning as humanity's false idol. And you did all of it alone, without backing, without a name, without so much as a whisper in the underworld before your first appearance. That tells me something about you." "It tells you I don't need an audience," Izuku said. All for One's mask tilted slightly. A small gesture. The suggestion of a smile behind the featureless surface. "It tells me you're serious," All for One said, "which makes you the most interesting person I've met in a very long time." He extended one gloved hand, palm up, an offering, a gesture of invitation. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to offer you something that no one else in this world can. My network, my resources, my infrastructure, intelligence pipelines, financial systems, political leverage, the accumulated apparatus of an empire that has been running beneath this society for generations. All of it available to you." He let the words settle. "We share a vision, you and I. The current order is a failure. Hero society is a bandage on a wound that goes to the bone. Quirks created chaos, and humanity's response was to dress up the chaos in costumes and call it order. You see it? I've seen it for 200 years. The difference between us is that I've been working to tear it down from the inside while you," he gestured at Izuku, something approaching admiration in his modulated voice, "you walked in through the front door and started swinging." He brought his hands together, fingers interlaced, the picture of reasonableness. "Together, the world kneels. My apparatus, your capability. Capability. There is nothing on this planet that could stand against that combination. Every hero, every government, every institution, all of it comes apart. And from the wreckage, we build something that actually works." The wind moved through the space between them. Izuku's coat shifted. His green hair drifted across his forehead. The red glow behind his sunglasses was the only color in the dark. He had listened to all of it. Every word, every inflection, every micro-calculation behind the generosity of the offer, and he found it predictable. "I've always known I was destined for greatness," Izuku said. His voice was level, unhurried, each syllable placed with the precision of a scalpel laying open the skin of a conversation. A pause, measured, deliberate, letting the silence carry weight. "But destiny is personal. What you're describing is a leash with a longer chain." All for One's mask went still. The hand that had been extended lowered slowly. That's a disappointing answer. Your disappointment is irrelevant to me. All for One stood in the silence for a moment, processing, recalculating. He had offered everything and been refused. In his experience, in 2 centuries of manipulating, coercing, and conquering, refusal was something that happened before people understood what they were refusing. After they understood, they always said yes. Everyone said yes, because the alternative was being crushed by someone who had been crushing people since before their great-grandparents were born. I see, All for One said softly. His voice had changed. The warmth was gone. What replaced it was something flat and old and patient in the way that deep water is patient. It doesn't rush, it just waits until you're tired of swimming. You're like him then. All Might. Stubborn. Unable to see past your own conviction long enough to recognize an opportunity. I'm nothing like All Might, Izuku said. All Might maintained the world. I'm replacing it. With what? A new species. All for One went quiet. The mask reflected the ambient light. Behind him, his subordinates shifted. The electromagnetic woman's crackling intensified. The shadow user's independent darkness coiled tighter. The Nomu variants oriented toward Izuku with the focused attention of weapons being aimed. A new species, All for One repeated. Ambitious, but evolution doesn't happen because one person decides it should. It happens because the strong consume the weak. That's the lesson every generation has to learn the hard way. Then consider this your lesson. All for One moved. He was fast, faster than a man in a life support suit had any right to be. Multiple quirks fired simultaneously. His right hand thrust forward and unleashed a concentrated blast of compressed air. The same attack that had leveled city blocks in his war with All Might, a column of raw kinetic force that turned everything in its path into shrapnel and dust. But that was the surface attack, the obvious one, the one designed to draw attention. Beneath it, 3 more quirks activated in layers. A gravity manipulation field that tried to pin Izuku's body to the ground, a nerve disruption pulse aimed at shutting down his motor functions, and a heat-based attack that raised the ambient temperature around Izuku's body to combustion levels in a fraction of a second. 4 quirks, simultaneously, targeted with the precision of 2 centuries of combat experience. A testing strike, a probe designed to measure the target's response to force them into a reaction that would reveal their capabilities and their limits. Izuku caught the air blast with his right hand. His palm closed around the compressed column of force the way you might close your hand around a garden hose. The kinetic energy crackled against his skin, visible electric blue straining against his grip, and then dissolved, absorbed, neutralized. His viral biology identified the foreign energy input, processed it, and broke it down at the cellular level the way a stomach breaks down food. The gravity field hit him. His feet didn't move. His body didn't compress. The force pressed against his frame and slid off like water off stone. His enhanced musculature and the Ouroboros' biological countermeasures, treating the manipulation the same way they treated every external attempt to alter his body's function, with total contemptuous indifference. The nerve disruption pulse reached his nervous system. His nerves fired back. The pulse was reflected, not absorbed, reflected, and Izuku felt nothing. The heat attack raised the air around him to 800 degrees for half a second. His coat didn't singe. His skin didn't redden. The enhanced cellular regeneration and thermal regulation built into his evolved biology made the attack feel like a warm breeze. 4 quirks. 0 effect. All for One went still. Izuku looked at the dissolving energy in his palm, opened his fingers, let the last of it dissipate into the night air like smoke. Your quirks are impressive, Izuku said. His voice carried across the open space without effort. The acoustics of the industrial district, catching every word and delivering them to every ear present with crystalline clarity. A collection, a museum, the life's work of a man who mistook accumulation for evolution. He dropped his hand to his side. I don't want your empire. I'm building a new species. All for One's hand snapped up. Now. Everything happened at once. The 6 Nomu variants launched. The armored one first. A charging bull of bone-white chitin and engineered muscle covering the 50 meters in under a second, its fists the size of engine blocks swinging in coordinated strikes, aimed at Izuku's head and torso simultaneously. Behind it, the speed variant flanked right, a blur of elongated limbs moving so fast it left a strobing afterimage trail in the air. The massive one, the 15-footer, advanced from the left, each footstep cracking the concrete, its glowing brain pulsing with tactical data. The remaining three spread to cut off retreat angles. The subordinates activated. The electromagnetic woman unleashed a bolt of lightning that forked across the open ground toward Izuku. Blue-white, crackling, hot enough to turn sand to glass. The shadow user's darkness surged forward in a wave, trying to engulf the space Izuku occupied. The bandaged figure raised both hands, and the concrete beneath Izuku's feet began to warp and buckle, a matter manipulation quirk trying to swallow him into the ground. And behind all of it, All For One himself charged his real attack. Multiple quirks stacking on top of each other. Air cannon, kinetic amplification, impact recoil, forced activation, building toward a compound strike that combined the properties of a dozen stolen powers into a single devastating blast. The kind of attack that had turned a city district into a crater during his last fight with All Might. 6 Nomu. 5 subordinates. 1 ancient supervillain with 2 centuries of combat experience and enough stolen quirks to fill a phone book. 12 simultaneous attacks converging on a single point from every direction. Izuku smiled. It was the small, controlled smile of someone who had just been given exactly what they wanted. Phantom Dash. The armored Nomu's fists slammed together in the space where Izuku had been standing. The impact sent a shockwave outward that staggered the speed variant and cracked the ground in a 5-meter radius. The lightning bolt hit empty concrete and scorched it black. The shadow wave swallowed an afterimage and found nothing inside it. The concrete warped around a pair of boot prints that were already empty. Izuku appeared behind the speed variant. It was the fastest of the 6, designed for speed above all else, built to outpace anything that ran and anything that flew. It sensed Izuku behind it and spun, its elongated arms lashing out in a whip-crack strike aimed at his neck. Izuku caught the arm, pulled. The speed variant's own momentum worked against it. Its body swung forward, and Izuku drove his elbow into the back of its skull with a force that compressed the air around the impact point into a visible ring. The Nomu's brain casing cracked. Its body went ragdoll. Izuku threw it, one-arm toss, into the path of the charging armored variant. The 2 Nomu collided with a sound like a train wreck, bones and chitin plates shattering on impact, their tangled bodies skidding across the concrete and coming to rest in a heap of broken limbs. 2 down. 3 seconds. The massive Nomu reached him. Its fist came down from above, a hammer blow that would have pancaked a car, driven by 15 feet of engineered muscle mass and whatever quirk-enhanced strength All For One had implanted in the thing's biology. The concrete beneath the impact point cratered 6 feet deep. Dust and debris erupted upward. Izuku was standing on the Nomu's forearm. He had phantom dashed upward in the fraction of a second between the fist's descent and its impact. A vertical relocation that put him on top of the attacking limb while the ground below absorbed the blow. The massive Nomu's glowing brain pulsed. Confusion, recalculation, target acquisition, and its other hand swept toward him. Izuku ran up the Nomu's arm. His boots struck its forearm, its bicep, its shoulder, each step a blur, covering the distance in milliseconds. He reached the thing's head before its secondary attack was halfway to completion. He punched the exposed brain. The impact was total. His fist went through the biological casing, through the enhanced cerebral tissue, through the back of the skull, and out the other side. The massive Nomu's body locked up, every muscle seizing simultaneously in a full system shutdown, and then went limp. 15 feet of engineered death collapsed forward and hit the concrete with an impact that shook the ground hard enough to stumble the approaching subordinates. 3 seconds. 3 Nomu down. The remaining 3 Nomu came together, a coordinated assault, 2 flanking while the 3rd attacked from above. They were the specialized variants, one that could generate concussive blasts from its palms, one whose body was covered in razor-edge protrusions, and one that seemed to phase partially through the visible spectrum, its outline flickering like a broken hologram. Izuku met them in the middle. He phantom dashed into the center of their formation, appearing between the 3 in a space that should have been a kill zone, and attacked in 3 directions simultaneously. The samurai edge came out, One shot to the concussive Nomu's brain casing at point-blank range. The round punched through the biological armor, and the thing dropped mid-blast. His left hand caught one of the razor Nomu's slashing limbs, the blade edge cutting against his palm and failing to break skin, and he pulled the creature into a throw that launched it skyward, tumbling until it reached the apex and began to fall. He phantom dashed upward, met it in the air, and drove it back down with a two-handed strike that buried it 6 feet into the concrete on impact. The phasing Nomu tried to go intangible, tried to shift its body out of the physical spectrum the way its design allowed. Izuku tracked it, his enhanced perception picking up the electromagnetic signature that remained even when the visible body faded, and punched through the phase shift. His fist connected with something solid in the space where there should have been nothing. The phasing Nomu flickered back into visibility around his arm, its body reforming with his fist already inside its chest cavity. He pulled his hand out and the thing fell. 6 Nomu, under 15 seconds. The concrete around Izuku was cratered and cracked. Bodies lay in positions that physics textbooks would have struggled to explain. The subordinates were still attacking. The lightning bolt user had been firing continuously, bolt after bolt, each one forking across the battlefield, each one seeking the target through the smoke and dust. The shadow user's darkness had spread across the ground, a living carpet of black that tried to rise up around Izuku's legs. The bandaged figure was warping the terrain, pillars of distorted concrete erupting from the ground, trying to pin, trap, or crush. Izuku moved through all of it. He phantom dashed to the electromagnetic woman first. She was the ranged threat, the one who could project force from a distance. Her hands were raised, lightning arcing between her fingers, her eyes wide with the adrenaline of combat, and the dawning realization that the things she had seen the Nomu fail to accomplish were about to become very personal. She fired everything she had. A concentrated beam of electromagnetic energy that turned the air between them white hot and threw shadows across the industrial district like a second sun had ignited. Izuku walked through it. The beam hit his chest and split around him, the energy dividing at the point of contact and flowing around his body the way a river flows around a stone. His coat fluttered in the discharge. His hair moved in the ionized air. The beam's full power, enough to power a city block, enough to stop a heart at 100 meters, washed over him and left him untouched. He reached her. His hand closed around her wrist. He squeezed. She screamed, the bones cracking, the electromagnetic discharge cutting off as pain overwhelmed focus. He tossed her sideways. Her body hit the ground 30 meters away and skidded to a stop. Conscious, broken, out of the fight. The shadow user tried to engulf him. The living darkness surged upward, wrapping around Izuku's body in a cocoon of absolute black, a sensory deprivation attack designed to blind, suffocate, and disorient. Inside the darkness, the shadow pressed against his skin, trying to force its way into his eyes, his mouth, his pores. Izuku flexed. The darkness shattered. It blew outward from his body in a ring of dispersing shadow, like smoke in a strong wind, and the user who controlled it staggered back, physically recoiling as the sympathetic connection between his quirk and his body transmitted the shock of having his shadow ripped apart. Izuku was already there, a cobra strike to the solar plexus. The shadow user folded around the impact and dropped. The bandaged figure warped the ground beneath Izuku's feet, opening it into a 10-foot pit that should have swallowed him. Izuku stepped off the collapsing edge and onto the air. Literally onto the air. His phantom dash carrying him in a horizontal line across the gap. His boots touching down on solid ground on the other side, he caught the bandaged figure by the face. Lifted. Slammed down. The concrete cracked. The figure went still. The remaining subordinates, 2 of them, the ones who had held back trying to find an opening, trying to find a weakness, turned and ran. Instinct overriding loyalty. The same animal brain response that Izuku had seen in every group of lesser opponents he had faced. The moment when the math became clear and self-preservation took over, Izuku let them run. They were irrelevant. Footnotes fleeing a story they were never part of, he turned to face all for one. The ancient villain had not moved. He stood 50 meters away, his mask reflecting the distant fires of the destroyed Nomu, his posture unchanged, his hands at his sides. He had watched his entire guard, 6 custom-built Nomu variants and 5 of his most powerful subordinates get dismantled in under 30 seconds. And he was smiling. Izuku could tell. Even through the mask, even without visible features, the body language carried it. The slight forward tilt of the head, the relaxed set of the shoulders. All for One was smiling because All for One had just confirmed what he suspected, and the confirmation was beautiful in its horror. Magnificent, All for One said. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. You really are something new. I know. I've had centuries to build what you just destroyed. Centuries of investment, planning, cultivation, and you tore through it like it was tissue paper. It was. All for One tilted his head. I'm gonna try to kill you now. I want you to know that because I respect what you are enough to give you my complete attention. You'll fail. Perhaps, but I haven't used everything yet. All for One raised both hands, and the night became a war. The first compound attack came as a wall of force, air cannon combined with kinetic amplification, combined with impact recoil. 3 quirks layered into a single blast that moved so fast the air ahead of it turned to plasma. The ground between All for One and Izuku vaporized. The concrete didn't crack, it ceased to exist. A trench, 3 meters wide and 2 meters deep, was carved across the industrial district in a straight line, the edges glowing orange with residual heat. Izuku Phantom dashed through it. The blast passed beneath him during the instant he occupied no physical space. The gap between departure and arrival that made the Phantom dash something beyond teleportation, something that treated distance and continuity as optional. He reappeared 10 meters closer to All for One and kept moving. All for One fired again. A different combination. Heat generation, molecular disruption, forced quirk activation, creating a feedback loop that turned the air itself into an unstable medium. The space around Izuku erupted. Fire, shockwave, electromagnetic interference. A sphere of destruction that expanded outward from his position in every direction. Izuku was already outside it. Phantom dash. Black afterimage hanging in the center of the detonation, untouched. Dissolving as the blast consumed the space it occupied. He closed the distance to 30 meters. 20. 15. All for One deployed something new. A quirk Izuku hadn't seen before. The air thickened around him like amber, a spatial lock that tried to freeze him in place by solidifying the volume of reality his body occupied. His arms slowed. His legs resisted. For 1/10 of a second, Izuku felt the constraint, felt the universe pressing in on him from all sides, trying to hold him still. He moved through it. His muscles strained against the lock and then broke it. The spatial solidification shattered around him like invisible glass. The quirk-generated field unable to contain a body that operated on a biological platform beyond its design parameters. The virus in his cells identified the spatial distortion, adapted, and evolved a countermeasure in real time. The same process that had neutralized Overhaul's disassembly, the same process that made every quirk-based attack an education rather than a threat. 10 meters. All for One went close range. His body blurred forward, speed enhancement quirks stacking, strength multipliers engaging, his fists wrapped in a compound field of kinetic force, thermal energy, and molecular disruption. He struck with the precision of 200 years of combat. Combinations that had killed heroes, that had ended wars, that had put All Might in the hospital, and taken his stomach and most of his respiratory function with them. Left jab, right cross, spinning back elbow. Each strike carrying enough force to level a building, each one enhanced by 3 or 4 quirks stacked on top of the base physical attack. Izuku met them. He didn't dodge this time. He parried. Open palms deflecting strikes, forearms absorbing kinetic force, his body moving in a counter rhythm to All for One's assault that neutralized the power behind each blow. Every time a quirk-enhanced fist met Izuku's palm, the quirk energy discharged and died. The thermal layers burned out against his skin. The molecular disruption fields collapsed against his cellular structure. The kinetic amplification hit his body's shock absorption capability and went nowhere. All for One threw a devastating right hook. 5 quirks layered, everything he had in a single strike aimed at Izuku's temple. The fist moved fast enough to break the sound barrier. The shockwave alone kicked up a wall of debris behind it. Izuku caught it. Same way he had caught All Might's punch at the USJ. One hand, open palm, dead stop. The impact shockwave blew outward in a ring. The concrete beneath their feet cratered. All for One's arm shook in Izuku's grip, the layered quirk energy crackling against the palm that held it, trying to discharge, trying to find a pathway into the body that was blocking it. There was none. Izuku's fingers closed around All for One's fist. He squeezed. The glove crumpled. The bones beneath it creaked. All for One activated more quirks, a desperate surge of every defensive and offensive ability in his arsenal firing simultaneously. His body tried to phase, tried to harden, tried to generate a repulsive field, tried to warp the space between himself and the hand that held him. A dozen powers activating in overlapping waves, the combined output generating a visible aura of distorted light and compressed energy around his body. Izuku pulled him forward. All for One's feet left the ground. His entire body, life support suit, accumulated quirks, 2 centuries of stolen power, was yanked off balance by a single arm. Izuku's knee came up and drove into All for One's midsection with a force that compressed the air around the impact point into a visible ring. The life support suit's abdominal plating cracked. The body beneath it folded. Fluids leaked from ruptured tubes. Izuku released the fist and delivered a palm strike to All for One's chest. The ancient villain flew backward, 15 meters, 20, skipping off the concrete once before catching himself with a levitation quirk and hovering 2 feet off the ground. His mask was cracked. His suit's chest plate was caved inward. The tubes at his neck were leaking a dark, chemical-smelling fluid. He landed, stood. The mask's crack ran from the left cheek to the forehead, a thin line of damage that let a sliver of the ruined face beneath peek through. Interesting, All for One said. His voice was strained now. The modulator was damaged, static interference bleeding through, making his words sound like they were being transmitted through broken glass. You absorb quirk energy. Your body neutralizes it at the cellular level. That's why Eraserhead couldn't affect you. There's nothing to erase. You've bypassed the quirk factor entirely. Correct. What are you? The next step. All for One gathered himself. He was wounded. The suit's damage was more than cosmetic, the life support functions compromised, the body beneath failing in ways that his remaining healing quirks were struggling to compensate for. But he was not done. He had been fighting for 200 years. He had taken damage before. He had been broken before. He had always come back. He raised one hand and fired. Everything. Every ranged quirk he possessed, activated simultaneously, focused through a single point, a beam of compound energy that contained air pressure, heat, kinetic force, molecular disruption, gravitational compression, and half a dozen other stolen powers combined into a single, coherent stream of destruction. The beam was a meter wide and blindingly bright. It carved a trench through the concrete, vaporizing the ground in its path, and struck Izuku with the combined output of what was, objectively, the single most powerful ranged attack any individual on the planet was capable of producing. Izuku stood in the beam, his coat whipped backward, his hair blew back. His boots carved shallow trenches in the concrete as the force pushed against him. Pushed, but did not move. The beam played across his body, and he stood inside it the way a man stands inside a strong wind, leaning slightly, anchored, undeniably present. The viral biology worked overtime. Every energy input, thermal, kinetic, electromagnetic, gravitational, was identified, isolated, and neutralized as it made contact with his cellular structure. His body didn't absorb the energy so much as disassemble it, breaking the quirk-generated forces down into their component elements and dispersing them harmlessly through his own enhanced metabolism. It was the ultimate expression of the Ouroboros integration, a body that treated hostile quirk energy the way a healthy immune system treated a virus. Identify, isolate, eliminate. The beam lasted 4 seconds. When it stopped, the industrial district behind Izuku was destroyed. A wide swath of vaporized concrete and melted steel stretching back for 100 meters, the edges still glowing, small fires burning in the debris. Izuku stood in the same spot, unburned, undamaged. His coat had a few singed fibers at the hem. His hair was mildly disheveled. He straightened his coat, ran one hand through his hair. Is that all? All for One's damaged mask turned to face him. Behind the crack, the sliver of ruined face was visible, scarred, eyeless, ancient. The mouth beneath the mask pulled into something that might have been a grimace. No, All for One said. There's one more. He activated a quirk, A quirk Izuku hadn't seen, a deep one, something he had been saving. A quirk stolen so long ago that even the person he'd taken it from had probably been forgotten by history. It didn't manifest as energy or force or any visible phenomenon. Instead, the air itself seemed to go still. The ambient noise, wind, distant traffic, settling debris, cut to silence. The darkness of the night deepened, and All For One's body began to change. His muscles swelled beneath the suit. The damaged plating cracked further as the body beneath expanded, growing, hardening, the physical form being enhanced by a quirk that pushed biological capability beyond any limit the human frame was designed to handle. It was a berserker quirk, pure, savage physical enhancement that traded everything else for raw, overwhelming bodily power. All For One charged. He was fast now. Truly fast. The distance between them closed in a heartbeat, and his fist, swollen, veined, carrying enough force to crack the Earth's crust, drove forward at Izuku's head. Izuku didn't dodge. He met the punch head-on, his own fist against All For One's. The collision generated a shockwave that flattened every standing structure within 200 meters. The abandoned factories collapsed. Metal beams twisted, walls fell. The ground beneath the point of impact cratered 10 feet deep and 30 feet wide. They stood in the crater, fists pressed together, neither giving ground. Then Izuku pushed. All For One's arm buckled. The enhanced muscles, pumped to their absolute maximum by the berserker quirk, strained, tore, and failed. His fist was driven back into his own body. Izuku's strength advantage was absolute, total, beyond the capacity of any stolen quirk to bridge. Izuku stepped forward and struck, a straight right to All For One's damaged chest plate. The plate caved. The suit ruptured. All For One's body lifted off the ground, launched backward by the force, spinning, the life support system's remaining functions failing as tubes severed and circuits shorted. All For One hit the ground hard, bounced, rolled, came to rest on his back in a shallow depression of cracked concrete. He tried to rise. His arms pushed against the ground. His muscles, still enhanced, still burning with the berserker quirk's power, strained and shook. He managed to get to one knee. Izuku was already there, standing over him. Looking down, he reached out and took hold of the cracked mask. His fingers curled around the edge. He pulled. The mask came off. The face beneath was a ruin, eyeless, scarred. The remnants of features that had once been human, destroyed by All Might's final strike years ago and never fully healed, despite every regeneration. Quirk in All For One's arsenal. The mouth was still intact. Thin lips pulled back from teeth in an expression that was half defiance and half the recognition that comes at the end of very long roads. All For One looked up at Izuku with the empty sockets where his eyes had once been. He couldn't see, but he could feel. He could feel the presence standing over him, the weight of it, the gravity, the biological reality of something that had surpassed him in every measurable way. "You're magnificent," All For One whispered. His voice was raw without the modulator, thin, old, the voice of a man who had outlived his own relevance and was only now admitting it. A genuine evolutionary leap. In 200 years, I've never encountered anything like you. I know, Izuku said. Kill me if you want. But know this, what you're attempting, the reshaping of the species, I've seen others try. They all fail. The world resists change. People resist change. They will come for you. All of them. Heroes and villains and everything in between. They will unite against you because you represent something that terrifies both sides equally. They'll try. They will. Izuku looked at the ancient villain for a long moment. The red eyes studied the ruined face with an expression that was almost academic, the way a scientist studies a specimen that has yielded all the useful data it contains. You built a throne on the backs of people weaker than you and called it power, Izuku said. His voice was quiet, certain, final. I understand the impulse. The execution was mediocre. His hand moved. Fast. A single strike to the base of All For One's skull. The same devastating force he had used on Shigaraki Tomura. The sound was sharp and brief, the crack of bone, the sudden silence of a nervous system that ceased to function in a single instant. All For One's body pitched forward, hit the concrete, and did not move again. The most powerful villain in the history of Quirk society lay dead in a crater in an industrial district, killed by a teenager in a black coat who had spent less than a year with power and had already surpassed everything the old world had produced. Izuku stood over the body. The wind picked up. His coat moved. His hair shifted across his forehead. He felt nothing. The threat was eliminated. The resource extraction could begin. He pulled a device from his inner pocket, a compact data mining unit he had built specifically for this purpose. He knelt beside All for One's body and accessed the encrypted data storage unit built into the life support suit. Every communication, every financial record, every operational directive, every hidden facility, every buried asset, every political contact, every piece of leverage that All for One had accumulated across 2 centuries of empire building. All of it stored in a single, heavily encrypted database that lived in the suit's central processor. Izuku broke the encryption in 4 minutes. He downloaded everything. Then he sat cross-legged on the cracked concrete next to the body of the dead supervillain and spent 30 minutes organizing the data. He separated the financial records from the intelligence files. He cross-referenced the facility locations with current government surveillance databases. He identified the political contacts and matched them with their public identities. He built a comprehensive package, clean, organized, irrefutable, that laid bare every aspect of All for One's criminal empire in a format that even the most incompetent law enforcement agency could act on. And then he uploaded it. Every hero agency in Japan received it simultaneously. Every law enforcement database, every intelligence service, the Hero Public Safety Commission, the National Police Agency, Interpol, the United Nations Security Council's Quirk Threat Assessment Division, every institution that had spent decades trying to map the criminal underworld and never gotten past the surface, received in a single data dump the complete architectural blueprint of the most extensive criminal network in human history. The effect was immediate. Within hours, raids began. All for One's hidden facilities, laboratories, weapons caches, safe houses, financial processing centers were hit by coordinated law enforcement and hero agency operations across the country. Assets were frozen. Accounts were seized. Subordinates who had been operating in the shadows for decades suddenly found spotlights on them and handcuffs around their wrists. All for One's criminal infrastructure, built across 2 centuries, maintained through manipulation and fear and the accumulated weight of stolen power, collapsed in a single night. Every connection severed. Every resource stripped. Every piece of the machine that had kept the underworld running under one man's control dismantled and cataloged and locked away. Izuku watched the news coverage from a monitor in a location that existed in no database and on no map. Hero agencies celebrating, politicians making statements, the media cycle spinning into overdrive with the story of the century. The complete exposure and destruction of a criminal empire that nobody had known the full extent of until now. They didn't know who had provided the data. The upload had been anonymous, routed through so many relays and dead-end pathways that tracing it would have required technology that didn't exist yet. The heroes took credit, some of them the ambitious ones, the ones who understood that public perception was its own kind of power. Endeavor stood in front of cameras with his flames burning high and spoke about the tireless work of Japan's hero agencies. Hawks smiled his easy smile and deflected questions with practiced charm. Izuku let them have it. The credit was meaningless. What mattered was the result. The old world's last shadow government was gone. Every power structure that had operated behind the scenes, heroes on one side, All for One's empire on the other, was now either exposed or eliminated. The board was clean. The pieces were his to place. He stood. He walked to the production facility, the real one, the one that existed 3 kilometers beneath the surface in a geological formation that no scanning technology could penetrate, accessed through a series of tunnels that he had dug with his bare hands over the course of 4 months. The facility was small by industrial standards, but massive in its capability. 3 aerosol dispersal systems, each one capable of introducing the Ouroboros virus into the upper atmosphere at concentrations sufficient to achieve continental coverage within 72 hours. The formula was stored in pressurized canisters, rows of them lining the walls of the primary dispersal chamber. The black and gold liquid swirled behind reinforced glass, alive, patient, waiting. He checked each system, ran diagnostics, confirmed atmospheric models, calculated wind patterns, jet stream trajectories, precipitation forecasts. The math had been done 100 times. The variables were accounted for. The deployment window was optimal. He was ready. He looked at All for One's body one last time from the monitor feed he'd left running. The empty husk lying in the crater, already surrounded by the first responders who had been dispatched to investigate the energy signatures from the fight. Heroes, police, forensic teams, all of them standing around the corpse of the world's oldest villain, trying to piece together what had happened. "You were a prelude," Izuku said to the screen. Nothing more. He turned off the monitor. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks in which the world reacted to All for One's death and the exposure of his network with the chaotic energy of an anthill after someone kicks it. Every intelligence agency, every hero commission, every government body with jurisdiction scrambled to process the data, secure the assets, and understand the implications. The Hero Public Safety Commission held emergency sessions daily. Classified briefings ran around the clock. The revelation that a single criminal mastermind had been manipulating hero society from the shadows for generations sent shockwaves through every institution that had ever claimed to protect the public. And in those same 2 weeks, the HPSC finally connected enough dots to point to Izuku Midoriya. The identity confirmation came from 3 sources, converging simultaneously. Bakugo's testimony from the USJ, "It was Midoriya, I'd know that face anywhere." All Might's hospital confession, "His name is Izuku Midoriya. I met him before any of this started." And the forensic analysis of All for One's death site, which recovered trace biological material that matched the DNA profile of a Quirkless boy reported missing from Musutafu 7 months prior. The HPSC now had a name, a face, and a threat assessment that read like a document written by people who were trying very hard to sound professional, while describing something that terrified them beyond professional capacity. They knew about the lab. The infrastructure disruptions had been mapped, the ventilation signatures tracked, the general underground location narrowed down to a 3-block radius in the Eastern Industrial District. They knew about the virus, in broad strokes, assembled from Overhaul's research files and the pharmaceutical data that had been distributed as part of the All for One dump. They knew enough to be afraid. And afraid people with power and authority always make the same decision. The mobilization order went out on a Thursday morning. Every top-ranking hero in the country was called. The communication was direct, classified, and carried the weight of a government that believed it was facing an existential threat. Hawks, the number 2 hero, the man with wings like a feathered missile system and an intelligence network that rivaled the HPSC's own, received the call while airborne over Tokyo. He changed course without finishing the conversation. Endeavor, now officially the number 1 hero, a title that tasted like ash in his mouth because the man who had held it before him was lying in a hospital bed in his true form, was already suited up when the call came. He had been waiting for it. Mirko, Rumi Usagiyama, the rabbit hero, ranked 5th, the most physically powerful female hero in Japan, and arguably the most dangerous close combat fighter in the entire system, was in the middle of destroying a villain compound in Osaka when her earpiece crackled with the order. She left 3 unconscious villains behind and was in the air within seconds, gang orca for psychological pressure and aquatic terrain control. Best genist for target containment and crowd suppression. Edgeshot for infiltration and precision strikes, Ryukyu for aerial support and heavy engagement, Crust for defensive operations. The entirety of the top 10, minus All Might, plus UA's faculty. Aizawa, his arm still in a brace, his face still bearing the scars of the USJ, came because he understood something the HPSC didn't, that this would likely fail, and someone needed to be there to see it clearly. Present Mike, Midnight, Ectoplasm, Vlad King, Snipe, 13. Every teacher, every pro hero on UA's payroll mobilized as backup, and All Might. Toshinori Yagi, in his true form. Gaunt, skeletal. The muscle form sustainable for maybe 3 seconds, maybe 5, maybe 10 if he was willing to risk cardiac arrest. He came anyway. He took the train because he couldn't fly anymore. He walked the last mile because his legs wouldn't carry him at anything faster than a shuffle. He arrived at the staging area looking like a stiff wind would snap him in half, and when Endeavor, who had never respected this man, who had spent 30 years resenting every breath this man took, saw him walk in, the number 1 hero said nothing. He just looked. And for one brief moment, the contempt in his eyes was replaced by something that looked, from certain angles, like sorrow. "You shouldn't be here," Aizawa told All Might flatly. "I know. You'll die. I know that too." Aizawa looked at him for a long time. Then he turned away. There was nothing to say to a man who had already accepted the end of his own story. The operation was the largest coordinated hero deployment in the history of Japan. Hawks ran aerial surveillance from 3,000 feet, his feathers spread across the city like a sensory net, each one capable of detecting movement, heat, and quirk factor signatures. Endeavor led the ground assault team, a column of heroes moving through the Eastern Industrial District in a formation designed for maximum coverage and minimum vulnerability. Mirko operated independently, as she always did, moving at her own speed, following her own instincts, refusing the coordinated approach because coordination meant slowness, and slowness meant death against a target like this. They found the lab. The entrance hatches, the underground structure, the ventilation signatures that Izuku's equipment generated despite his best efforts to mask them. The breach team, Edgeshot leading, supported by Crust's shields and Ectoplasm's clones, descended into the tunnels and entered the laboratory. It was empty. The equipment was running. The monitors displayed data in real time, atmospheric models, genetic sequencing results, production timelines. Everything was active, operational, humming with the purpose of ongoing work. But the chair was empty. The coat hook by the door held nothing. The Samurai Edge's holster was gone from the workbench. The lab was a shell, a decoy that Izuku had left intact because it didn't matter anymore. Aizawa stood in the center of the lab and looked at the monitors. His experienced eyes scanned the data, the models, the production timelines. His face didn't change, but his fist, the one connected to the arm that wasn't in a brace, clenched until his knuckles went white. "He knew we were coming," Aizawa said. Endeavor's flames flickered beside him. "How long? Days, maybe more. This is a stage set. He wanted us to come here. He wanted us to see what he was working on." "Why?" Aizawa looked at Endeavor. "Because the real work is somewhere else, and while we're here, he's finishing it." The words had barely left his mouth when every screen in the laboratory flickered, every monitor, every display. The data vanished and was replaced by a single feed, a live broadcast that was, at that exact moment, appearing on every screen in Japan, every news channel, every phone, every tablet and laptop and desktop computer, every hero agency monitor, UA's entire communications system, government networks, emergency broadcast systems, all of it, hijacked simultaneously, that replaced with a single image, a figure in a black coat, standing in an undisclosed location, green hair, red eyes, the sunglasses folded and placed in his breast pocket, the glowing red slits visible and unashamed. Behind him, a wall of equipment that hummed with purpose. The lighting was blue-white, the kind that makes everything look sharp and clean and inevitable. The broadcast went live at 2:17 p.m. Japan Standard Time. Izuku looked into the camera. His face was calm, his posture was straight, his hands were clasped behind his back. He spoke the way he always spoke, measured, deliberate, each word carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "I want to be very clear about what is happening. You are not watching a villain's broadcast. You are watching a statement of fact." He paused. 1 second. 2. The silence was part of the message. Ouroboros will be released into the atmosphere, ensuring complete global saturation. This is not a threat, it is a schedule. In the lab, Aizawa's face drained of color. Endeavor's flames surged involuntarily, a flare of heat that scorched the ceiling above him. On the surface, Hawk stopped mid-flight, his wings stuttering as the broadcast hit his earpiece. Across Japan, people stopped. In their homes, in their offices, on the streets, in schools and hospitals, and train stations. 20 million screens showing the same face, the same eyes, the same voice that didn't waver and didn't ask permission. Those who are compatible, those whose biology is worthy of the new world, will evolve. Those who are not will not survive the transition. This is evolution. This is the process your species has been subject to since before you could name it. I am simply accelerating it. The reaction was already beginning. People gripping their phones with white knuckles, parents pulling children closer, heroes reaching for their earpieces, their communicators, their weapons, the primal universal response to being told that the world you live in has an expiration date. I was chosen to be the one to lead humanity into the future, not by any god you would recognize, by the only criterion that has ever mattered, capability. He paused again. The red eyes held the camera lens, held every eye that was watching, held the attention of an entire nation, and through global simulcast, an entire world. A new world awaits. A world where humans are no longer the dominant species. Something greater will take their place, something worthy. I have given you enough time to understand what is coming. The time for understanding is over. The broadcast ended. The screens returned to their normal programming. But normal was already a word from a previous era. Japan erupted. The panic was instantaneous and total. Emergency services were overwhelmed within minutes. The hero agencies mobilized everything, every reserve, every sidekick, every trainee old enough to hold a license. Endeavor blazed out of the underground lab and into the sky, flames roaring, flying over the city at maximum speed, searching for the broadcast's source. Hawks deployed every feather he had, thousands of them, spreading across the city in a sensory web that covered every rooftop, every street, every building within a 50-kilometer radius. Mirko moved. She had been on the surface when the broadcast hit, and her response was immediate and physical. She launched herself from the staging area with a kick that cratered the concrete, her powerful legs propelling her across rooftops at speeds that left property damage in her wake. She wasn't following orders. She wasn't coordinating with anyone. She was hunting. The fastest, most aggressive hero in the country aimed like a bullet at a target she couldn't see. The HPSC traced the broadcast signal through 7 relay points before losing it in a cascade of dead-end servers. The source location was masked by technology that shouldn't have existed. Quantum encrypted routing that treated conventional signal tracing the way a locked door treats a polite suggestion. Izuku was already moving. The dispersal systems required physical initiation. 3 points spread across the city, each one a separate node in the atmospheric deployment network, each one containing a pressurized canister of the Ouroboros virus connected to an aerosol dispersal array designed to introduce the viral particles into the upper atmosphere at concentrations sufficient to begin the chain reaction. He had placed them months ago. During the weeks when every intelligence agency in the country was watching his decoy lab, he had been building the real infrastructure. Quietly, patiently, installing the dispersal nodes in locations that no surveillance system monitored because they were too mundane to attract attention. A rooftop water tower on a residential building, a ventilation shaft on an office complex, a communications relay station on the city's eastern ridge, 3 points, 3 activations. And then the schedule began. He hit the first point at 2:23 p.m., 6 minutes after the broadcast ended. The residential building was 12 stories tall and entirely unremarkable. Izuku Phantom dashed to the roof in a single relocation, one instant on street level, the next instant standing beside the water tower, the black afterimage dissolving in the afternoon sunlight below. The dispersal node was built into the tower's maintenance access panel, a compact unit no larger than a briefcase, connected to a pressurized canister of the virus. He entered the activation code. The unit hummed to life. The canister's valve opened, a fine mist, invisible to the naked eye, carrying billions of viral particles per cubic centimeter, began flowing into the water tower's ventilation coupling, which fed directly into the building's air handling system and through it into the open atmosphere above the rooftop. First point active. He Phantom dashed across the city. The skyline blurred around him, buildings, streets, traffic, the distant shapes of heroes moving through the air and on the ground, all of it frozen in his perception as he moved at speeds that made the rest of the world look like a photograph. The second point was on the office complex, 3 kilometers from the first. He landed on the rooftop at 2:24 p.m., 1 minute after activation of the first node. The ventilation shaft access panel was already open, the dispersal unit visible inside, waiting. He reached for the activation interface, and then the rooftop exploded. The impact came from above and to the right, a diving strike that hit the concrete where Izuku was standing with enough force to crack the rooftop down to the structural beams. The shockwave blew dust and debris outward in a ring. The ventilation shaft housing buckled. The access panel slammed shut. Izuku Phantom dashed. Automatic response, his body relocating before his conscious mind had fully processed the attack. He reappeared 6 meters to the left, standing on the edge of the rooftop, looking at the dust cloud where he had been. A figure emerged. Rumi Usagiyama, Mirko, the rabbit hero. She stood in the crater her landing had created, her powerful legs coiled beneath her dark skin gleaming with the sheen of exertion and adrenaline. Her rabbit ears were laid back, the aggressive posture, the combat-ready configuration. Her eyes were locked on Izuku with an intensity that was almost physical. A focused, burning, predatory attention that communicated one thing and one thing only. She had found him, and she was not going to stop. She was wearing her hero costume, the leotard and the fur-lined boots, no armor, no gadgets, no support gear, just her body. Just the quirk that made her legs the most powerful weapons in the hero registry, capable of launching her to supersonic speeds, delivering kicks that could demolish reinforced concrete, and propelling her in midair direction, changes that defied inertia. She was breathing hard. She had crossed the city in under 3 minutes to get here, tracking him by the displacement signatures his phantom dash left in the air, subtle atmospheric disturbances that her rabbit-enhanced senses could detect at distances that would have made a tracking quirk jealous. "Found you," she said. Her voice was rough, direct, stripped of everything except combat focus. No speeches, no hero declarations, just the acknowledgement that the distance between them had closed and everything that followed was going to hurt. Izuku looked at her. He assessed her in the time it took for a heartbeat to complete. Muscle density, reaction speed potential, combat stance analysis, historical performance data from every fight he had studied in her career. She was extraordinary. Among all the heroes who operated in this country, she was the one who had earned her ranking through pure, unassisted physical capability. No gadgets, no support, no team. Just her and the body she had honed into the most efficient combat instrument in the hero system. "You're fast," he said. "Faster than you think." She launched, the rooftop beneath her feet shattered. Her legs uncoiled with a force that would have registered on seismic equipment, propelling her forward in a blur of dark skin and white hair, her right leg already chambering for a kick that would have punched through a battleship's hull. She covered the 6 meters between them in a fraction of a heartbeat, her body rotating in midair, her heel coming around in a sweeping arc aimed at Izuku's ribs. He blocked it, one forearm. The impact was immense, a concussive boom that echoed across the rooftop and into the streets below, sending pigeons scattering from every building in a 3-block radius. Izuku's feet carved furrows in the rooftop concrete. His forearm absorbed the force, his muscles compressing, his bones flexing, his viral biology distributing the kinetic energy across his entire skeletal structure. She was strong, genuinely strong. The kick carried more raw power than anything All Might had thrown at him during their fight, and it came faster, tighter, with less wind-up and more precision. This was a body built for combat at its most fundamental level. Every muscle fiber trained, every reflex honed, every ounce of biological capability pushed to its maximum expression. Mirko didn't pause. The blocked kick became a pivot. Her body spun off his forearm and her other leg came around, a spinning heel kick aimed at his head, moving even faster than the first, building on the rotation's momentum. Izuku leaned back. The heel passed an inch from his chin. He felt the wind of it against his skin. She used the missed kick's momentum to launch herself upward, legs propelling her 10 feet into the air, and came down with an axe kick that split the air with a screeching pressure wave. Izuku sidestepped. The kick cratered the concrete where he'd been standing, 2 feet deep. Rebar visible at the bottom, she was already moving, already transitioning. Her legs were a constant engine of motion, each kick flowing into the next, each strike building on the one before it, the rhythm accelerating with every exchange. Roundhouse, straight kick, spinning back kick, axe kick, drop kick. Each one carrying demolition-level force, each one faster than the last. Izuku moved through them. He wove and leaned and stepped the way he had against All Might. Minimal movement, existing in the gaps between her attacks. But Mirko was different from All Might. She was faster. She was more agile. She could change direction mid-kick, redirect her momentum in ways that should have been physically impossible, her rabbit-enhanced musculature giving her a flexibility and responsiveness that traditional fighters couldn't match. She forced him to move more. She was the first opponent to do that. Her attacks came from angles that didn't follow the patterns his combat analysis predicted. She was creative, adaptive, fighting with an instinct that went beyond training and into something more primal. She got close. A front kick that Izuku leaned away from, but the kick extended further than he expected, her legs stretching beyond its apparent range as she rose onto the ball of her other foot, and her heel caught the edge of his shoulder. A glancing blow. Barely anything, but it was contact, and the shockwave from even that partial hit was enough to ripple his coat and push his body 2 inches to the left. Mirko's eyes widened slightly. She had touched him. She had made contact with the man in black who had humiliated All Might and killed All for One and walked through every attack ever thrown at him like it was rain. She grinned. A wild, fierce, joyful grin. The grin of someone who loved fighting the way other people loved breathing, who existed most fully in the space between attacks, who had been looking for a challenge that actually challenged her for her entire career. "There it is," she shouted. "You can be hit." She exploded forward. Both legs kicked against the rooftop simultaneously. A double launch that sent her at Izuku like a living cannonball, her entire body rotating, her right leg cocked for a kick that she intended to drive through his chest and out the other side. Izuku phantom dashed. The kick tore through his afterimage. The concrete behind the afterimage evaporated, a 30-foot-long trench carved into the rooftop by the wind pressure alone. Mirko's leg completed its arc, and she landed in a crouch, ears twitching, searching for where he'd gone. He was behind her. She knew it before she turned, her ears catching the displacement, her instincts screaming, and she spun into a back kick that was already coming when she saw him. Izuku caught her ankle. His hand closed around it, and her momentum stopped. Dead. The kinetic energy of a kick that could have cratered a building dissipated into his grip and went nowhere. Her leg hung in his hand, her body twisted backward, her face turned to see his over her own shoulder. His red eyes looked into hers. She pulled. Her leg muscles, the most powerful muscles in the hero registry, strained against his grip. The tendons stood out under her skin. Her other leg braced, and she kicked backward with it. A desperate heel aimed at his face. He caught that one too. Both hands, both ankles. Her body hung between his arms, inverted. Her hands touching the ground, her eyes wide and furious and burning with the refusal to accept what was happening. He lifted her, swung her, brought her down. She hit the rooftop with her back. The impact cratered the concrete around her. The building beneath them groaned. Her ears rang, her vision blurred for a half second. She kicked free, tearing her ankles from his grip with a surge of power that would have pulled a normal person's arms from their sockets. She rolled backward, landed on her feet, and charged again. He was faster. A cobra strike to her sternum. The blow landed clean, his open palm driving into the center of her chest with a force that compressed the air around the impact point into a visible shockwave. Mirko's eyes went wide. Her body lifted off its feet. She flew backward, heels carving trenches in the concrete, and slammed into the rooftop's ventilation housing hard enough to crumple it inward around her. She was still conscious, still moving. Her hands gripped the mangled ventilation housing and she pulled herself up. Blood ran from the corner of her mouth. Her legs trembled. The first time in her life that her legs had trembled from anything except extreme overexertion. She looked at Izuku across the damaged rooftop. He was standing in the same spot, hands returning to his pockets, coat moving in the wind. He hadn't broken a sweat. His hair wasn't even mussed. She charged again. This time it was everything. Every ounce of power her quirk-enhanced body could produce, every technique she had ever developed, every instinct she had ever honed. She came at him in a storm of kicks, high, low, spinning, straight, aerial, grounded, a continuous barrage that turned the air around them into a concussive hurricane. The rooftop was being destroyed. Each missed kick carving trenches, each impact cratering the surface, the structural integrity of the building failing in real time beneath them. Izuku moved through it. He parried some kicks, dodged others, absorbed 3, letting them connect against his forearms, his ribs, his shoulder, each one strong enough to demolish concrete, each one leaving nothing on his body except the faintest impression. He was studying her. learning her patterns even as she fought at her absolute maximum. She was the best. She was the absolute best that the hero system had produced in close combat. Every kick was perfect. Every transition was fluid. Every combination carried enough power to end a fight 10 times over against any other opponent. It wasn't enough. Izuku finished it with 3 moves. First, a parry. He caught her right roundhouse kick on his forearm and redirected it downward, pulling her off balance for a fraction of a second. Second, a step. He moved into her space, inside the range of her kicks where her primary weapons couldn't generate full force. His chest was inches from hers. His red eyes looked down into her surprised ones. Third, a palm strike to her jaw. Enough force to shut down the consciousness of a woman whose body could take hits that would demolish buildings, but calibrated. Deliberately, intentionally calibrated to avoid killing her. Mirko's head snapped back. Her eyes went glassy. Her legs, those incredible, powerful, unstoppable legs, buckled. She fell. She hit the rooftop on her back. Her ears splayed out to either side. Her chest heaved. Her eyes stared at the sky, unfocused. The fight drained out of her in a single instant. She was alive. She was conscious, barely, clinging to awareness by her fingernails. She couldn't move. Every muscle in her body had received the message that the fight was over. Izuku stood over her. He looked down at the rabbit hero, the woman who had made him work harder than All Might had, who had forced him to actually engage rather than simply overwhelm, who had shown him something that the rest of the hero system hadn't: genuine, undeniable, uncompromising physical excellence. "You're strong," Izuku said. He meant it. The words were quiet, direct, carrying a sincerity that he rarely afforded anyone. In a different world, you might have been worth something. Mirko stared up at him. Her eyes were wet from the impact, from the fight, from something deeper that she would never admit to. Her jaw worked. Her voice came out in a rasp. "Go to hell." The ghost of a smile crossed his face. He almost respected that. He turned to the dispersal node, entered the activation code. The unit hummed. The canister opened. The virus entered the atmosphere. Second point, active. He phantom, dashed off the rooftop, leaving Mirko lying in the crater of their fight, staring at the sky, feeling the strange warmth of the afternoon sun on her face, and wondering if it would feel different tomorrow. The third point was the communications relay station on the Eastern Ridge, a small facility at the top of a hill overlooking the city, surrounded by antenna towers and satellite dishes. The dispersal node was hidden inside the main transmission array, its aerosol output feeding directly into the atmospheric current that flowed over the ridge and dispersed across the city below. Izuku arrived at 2:31 p.m., 14 minutes since the broadcast. 2 nodes active, 1 remaining. The station was empty. Civilian staff had been evacuated when the hero mobilization started. The antennas hummed their electronic songs. The satellite dishes pointed at the sky like cupped hands waiting for something to fall from above. He walked to the transmission array. The access panel was sealed with a magnetic lock he had installed himself. He entered the code. The panel opened. The dispersal unit sat inside. Compact, efficient, the pressurized canister gleaming in the sunlight. He reached for the activation interface. "Young Midoriya." The voice came from behind him, thin, ragged, carrying the weight of a body that had been pushed past every limit it had left, and was running on something that wasn't physical. Izuku stopped. His hand hovered over the activation interface. He did not turn around immediately. He stood with his back to the voice for 2 full seconds, his red eyes looking at the dispersal unit, his expression hidden from the speaker. Then he turned. Toshinori Yagi stood at the entrance to the relay station. The gaunt frame, the sunken eyes, the oversized shirt hanging off skeletal shoulders. He was breathing hard, every breath a labor, every inhalation a small war that his damaged lungs fought and barely won. His face was pale, his hands shook. Blood stained the corner of his mouth where the old injury had been aggravated by the exertion of getting here. He had come alone. No Endeavor, no Mirko, no Hawks or Gang Orca or Best Genist or any of the other heroes who were at this moment spread across the city trying to locate the man standing 30 feet away. Toshinori Yagi had broken away from the operation. He had climbed the eastern ridge on legs that could barely support his weight. He had arrived at the relay station by himself, A dying man walking the last stretch of a journey that had started on a rooftop 7 months ago when he told a boy with a yellow backpack that dreams had limits. The wind moved between them. Izuku's coat shifted. All Might's shirt billowed around his thin frame. "This is my fault," All Might said. The words came out heavy, dense with meaning. Not the kind of statement that invites argument or response. The kind that a person makes when they have turned something over in their mind for months and finally set it down in the only place it fits. Izuku looked at him. The red eyes behind the sunglasses, the straight posture, the calm face, the green hair moving in the wind, the ghost of freckles on skin that was still young enough to belong to a boy over eyes that were old enough to belong to something else entirely. "Yes," Izuku said. "It is." All Might's jaw tightened. His sunken eyes, those eyes that had once been bright and blue and full of a hope that an entire nation had learned to depend on, held Izuku's gaze with everything they had left. "I failed you. I know that. I stood on that rooftop and I told you the one thing you should never tell a child who comes to you for hope. I told you that your dream was impossible, and instead of lifting you up, I pushed you over an edge that I didn't even see." "You saw it," Izuku said. "You just didn't care enough to look." "That's not untrue." All Might's hands clenched at his sides. The trembling intensified. He was fighting something. Fighting the weakness, fighting the pain, fighting the urge to cough blood and collapse and let this moment pass without him standing in it. "I can't undo what I said. I can't undo what you've become. But I can stand here and tell you that what you're about to do is wrong. The people out there, the ones your virus is going to kill, they're innocent. They didn't choose to be incompatible. They didn't choose to be weak. They're just people, young man. Flawed, messy, wonderful people who deserve the chance to live." Izuku's expression didn't change. His posture didn't shift. He stood with the wind in his hair and the dispersal unit behind him, and the weight of everything he was about to do settling around him like armor. "Deserve," he repeated. The word came out with the faint, cold amusement of someone tasting something they find distasteful. "You sound like a man who still believes the world runs on what people deserve. I believe it runs on what we choose to protect. And you chose to protect a system that told 4-year-old children their lives were over because they didn't have the right kind of cells. You protected a society that ranked human beings by their genetic lottery and rewarded the winners with fame and the losers with contempt. You smiled, All Might. You smiled and you told they're going to be okay, and it was never going to be okay because the foundation was rotten from the start." All Might flinched. The words landed like physical blows, each one finding the soft places in his conviction, the doubts he had carried for years, the things he had told himself late at night, when the muscle form faded and the mirror showed him what he really was. "Maybe you're right," All Might said. His voice was quiet, the voice of a man standing at the end of his road, looking back at everything he'd built and seeing the cracks he'd papered over. "Maybe the system was broken. Maybe I should have done more. Maybe I should have been better." He paused, drew a shaking breath. Blood spotted his lower lip. "But what you're doing isn't fixing anything. It's burning the house down because you don't like the furniture. And the people inside, the millions of people who are going to die if that virus reaches full dispersal, they don't deserve to pay for my mistakes." "This isn't about your mistakes," Izuku said. "Your mistakes were the catalyst, the accident that woke me up. But the design, the grand design, that was always going to happen, with or without a rooftop, with or without All Might. Evolution doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't care about feelings or morality or the stories people tell themselves to make the darkness bearable. It simply happens, and those who can't adapt are left behind." All Might raised his fists. The muscle form surged. It was horrible to watch. His body swelled, the skeletal frame expanding, muscles inflating like balloons being filled with something that wasn't quite air. His shirt strained. His frame grew. The massive chest, the towering height, the broad shoulders, all of it erupted from the thin body in a burst of transformation that had once been effortless and was now agony. But it was unstable. The form flickered. Whole sections of his body deflated and reinflated in a stuttering rhythm, like a light bulb on its last filament. His left side, the injured side, the side where the damage had never healed, barely held. The muscle form covered it in a thin layer that bulged and sagged and threatened to fail with every heartbeat. He had seconds, maybe 10, maybe fewer. The last of One For All's embers burning in his body like the final sparks of a fire that had been dying for years. He raised his fists anyway. The famous stance. The fighting posture that an entire generation had grown up watching on television and believing in. The stance that said, I am here, and as long as I am here, I will not let the people behind me fall. I won't let you do this, All Might said. His voice was the booming voice, the hero voice, the one that carried across stadiums and battlefields and made the darkness retreat. But it cracked, just slightly, just enough for the human underneath to bleed through. Izuku looked at him, and something behind the red eyes, buried beneath the Wesker architecture and the viral rewiring and the cold certainty of the grand design, stirred. He recognized this moment. He had replayed it in his mind 1,000 times since the rooftop. The man standing in front of him was the same man who had killed the last good thing in Izuku Midoriya's heart. And here he was, broken, dying, barely able to stand, raising his fists one more time to protect a world that had already proven it didn't deserve protection. It was pathetic. It was tragic. It was, in its own way, the most heroic thing Izuku had ever seen. He did not feel doubt. Doubt was a luxury for people who hadn't already calculated every outcome and chosen the one that mattered. But he felt the moment. He was present in it the way he hadn't been present in any other fight. Not with the Nomu, not with All For One, not with Mirko. He was here, fully here, standing opposite the origin point of everything he had become, watching the man who had made him prepare to die for the world that had made him. You had all of this world's power in your hands, Izuku said. His voice was quieter now, lower, each word placed with a weight that had nothing to do with volume. And you used it to maintain a status quo that was already dying. You smiled and told everyone the illusion would hold forever. It didn't. It never was going to. All Might charged. It was everything. Every last ounce of power in the failing body of the man who had once been the strongest person alive. A punch fueled by desperation, by guilt, by the knowledge that this was his fault, and the refusal to let that fault become the end of the world. The fist that had defeated All For One. The fist that had held the darkness back for 30 years. The fist that an entire civilization had placed its faith in. It came at Izuku with everything behind it. Izuku didn't dodge. He didn't phantom dash. He didn't sidestep or weave or lean. He stood still and let All Might's final punch come to him. He caught it, the same way he had caught it at the USJ. One hand, open palm. The impact shockwave blew outward. Dust, debris, the antenna towers groaning, satellite dishes shaking on their mounts. The ground beneath their feet cracked in a starburst pattern. The air compressed and released with a sound like thunder. The fist stopped in his palm. Dead. All Might strained, his face contorted. The muscle form flickered, on, off, on, his body fighting to maintain the transformation. The last embers of One For All burning bright and then brighter and then starting to dim. Izuku held the fist. He looked at All Might. The red eyes met the blue ones, or what was left of blue because the light behind them was going out. You should be honored to witness this moment. He let go of the fist. All Might staggered forward, off balance, the muscle form failing, deflating in real time, the massive frame collapsing inward, the broad shoulders narrowing, the towering height shrinking. In 3 heartbeats, the symbol of peace was gone. What stood before Izuku was Toshinori Yagi. Thin, broken, blood running from his mouth in a steady stream. His legs barely holding, his eyes hollow but still somehow focused on the young man in front of him. Please, All Might whispered. The word was barely audible, a dying man's last request. Don't do this. Izuku looked at him for a long time. The wind blew across the ridge, the antennas hummed, the city spread out below them, 1,000,000 lives going about a Tuesday afternoon, unaware that the air they breathed was about to change. He crouched down, eye level with All Might, who had sunk to his knees. The same position as the USJ, the symbol of peace on the ground, the man in black standing over him. But this time, there were no students watching. No cameras, no audience. Just 2 people who had started on a rooftop and ended on a hilltop. The distance between them measured in choices that couldn't be taken back. Goodbye, symbol of peace, Izuku said. His voice was flat, even, carrying the finality of a period at the end of the last sentence in a very long book. It's over. He struck. A single blow, the palm of his hand against the center of All Might's chest. Against the old wound, the same wound he had targeted at the USJ, the weak point that had been there since before Izuku was born. The force was enough to stop the heart that had been struggling to beat for years, to end the life that had been ending in slow motion since a battle in a city ward against a villain who was now dead too. Toshinori Yagi's eyes went wide. Then they went soft. Then they went somewhere else entirely. Somewhere past pain, past fear, past the rooftop and the broadcast and the viral canisters and the boy he had failed. Somewhere that might have been peace, if peace was the right word for the thing that waits at the end of everything you couldn't fix. His body folded forward. His face pressed against the concrete. His thin fingers splayed at his sides. The symbol of peace died on a Tuesday afternoon, on a communications relay station on the eastern ridge of Musutafu City, with the wind in his oversized shirt and the distant sound of a city that would never know he had tried one more time to save it. Izuku stood. He looked at the body for 3 seconds. He did not feel regret. He did not feel triumph. He felt the moment close behind him like a door. Final, absolute, leading to a room he could never return from. He turned to the dispersal unit, entered the activation code. The canister opened. The virus entered the air. The gold and black particles caught the sunlight for a single beautiful instant before becoming invisible, carried upward by the ridge's thermal currents, joining the atmospheric flow, beginning their slow, unstoppable spread across the sky. Third point active. Complete global saturation had begun. The virus moved the way weather moves, invisible, pervasive, indifferent to borders and walls and everything humanity had built to control its environment. The atmospheric models Izuku had calculated were precise. The thermal currents carried the viral particles upward from the 3 dispersal points, feeding them into the jet stream that flowed across the island of Japan at 30,000 feet. From there, the particles spread, lateral dispersal across the troposphere, gradual descent through convection cycles, replication accelerating as the virus encountered atmospheric moisture and used it as a growth medium. Within 6 hours, the viral concentration over Musutafu was sufficient for inhalation exposure. Within 12 hours, the greater Tokyo metropolitan area was covered. Within 24 hours, the entire island of Honshu. Within 48 hours, the jet stream had carried the particles across the Pacific. Within 72 hours, complete global saturation was achieved, and people began to change. The first reports came from hospitals, patients presenting with sudden unexplained fevers, elevated heart rates, muscle spasms. The symptoms appeared random, affecting some individuals and not others, with no apparent correlation to age, sex, quirk status, or medical history. The compatible ones felt it as warmth, a deep internal heat that started in the chest and spread outward through the limbs, into the fingers, into the toes, up the spine, and into the skull. It wasn't painful. It was something closer to pressure, the feeling of something inside them expanding, growing, pushing against limits that had been there so long they had forgotten the limits existed. Their cells were being rewritten. The Ouroboros virus, stabilized by the rewind factor, was identifying the quirk factor in their DNA and enhancing it, pushing it past its natural expression, past the ceiling that genetic chance had imposed, toward a new state of biological capability that the word quirk wasn't big enough to contain. The incompatible ones felt it differently. It started the same way. The warmth, the pressure, the internal sense that something was happening at a level too deep for conscious thought to reach. But where the compatible felt expansion, the incompatible felt resistance. Their cells tried to accept the virus and couldn't. The Ouroboros pushed against biological structures that were too rigid, too fixed, too fundamentally unable to accommodate the change being imposed on them. The warmth became heat. The heat became fever. The fever became something else. Their bodies fought. Of course they fought. Biology fights everything that tries to change it too fast. It's the immune system's first and last response, the cellular equivalent of slamming a door. But the virus was too comprehensive, too deeply integrated into the atmospheric medium, too perfectly designed to be resisted by conventional immune response. The body fought, and the virus won. And what followed was the thing that Izuku had known would follow from the moment he synthesized the first stable iteration. They died. The incompatible ones died. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. There were no black tentacles, no monstrous transformations, no screaming mutations like the failed Ouroboros had produced in Wesker's world. The rewind factor prevented that, keeping the biological degradation within the bounds of natural-looking failure. The incompatible simply deteriorated. Their organs began to fail, their cells broke down. Their bodies experienced a cascade of systemic shutdown that mimicked, to any observer, the effects of a sudden and overwhelming illness. They died in hospitals, in their homes, on the street, collapsing mid-step, mid-conversation, mid-life. They died quietly, and they died in numbers that the medical system couldn't process and the news couldn't report fast enough and the government couldn't explain. The numbers climbed. In Japan first, then across Asia, then Europe, then the Americas. The virus was everywhere. It was in the air, it was in the water, it was in the rain that fell on Tuesday night, and the fog that rolled in on Wednesday morning, and the wind that blew through open windows and carried with it the invisible architecture of a new world being built on the cells of an old one. 30%. That was the compatibility rate. 3 out of every 10 people could accept the virus and evolve. 7 out of 10 could not. The math was stark. The reality was starker. Billions of lives measured against a formula that didn't recognize hope or love or the fact that someone was a good parent or a kind friend or a person who had always tried to do the right thing. The virus didn't care about character. It cared about cellular compatibility, about whether your DNA had the specific structural flexibility to accept radical alteration without collapsing under the strain. It was, as Izuku had said, evolution. And evolution had always been the cruelest editor. The heroes tried. They fought the virus the way they fought everything, with quirks and courage and the desperate belief that enough force applied to the right problem could fix anything. Quirks that manipulated matter tried to filter the virus from the air. Quirks that healed tried to reverse the effects in the incompatible. Quirks that controlled the elements tried to create zones of clean atmosphere where the unaffected could shelter. Some of it worked. Temporarily, in pockets. Recovery Girl treated patients until she collapsed from exhaustion, her healing quirk barely able to slow the virus's effect on the incompatible, unable to stop it. 13 tried to create spatial vacuums that would trap the viral particles. The attempt nearly killed her when the particles simply replicated from the surrounding atmosphere and filled the vacuum before it could hold. Hawks directed evacuation efforts, his feathers carrying communication relays and medical supplies across the country, his wings never stopping, his body running on adrenaline and duty, and the refusal to accept that there might be nothing to evacuate to. Endeavor burned. He burned like he had never burned before, not to fight, not to prove himself, but to create thermal barriers that might possibly potentially slow the virus's spread through localized atmosphere. The barriers held for hours before the convection currents carried the particles around them. The hero system bent, cracked, began to break, and the compatible evolved. It happened over days. A gradual process, the rewind factor ensuring that the transformation was stable, controlled, survivable. People woke up feeling different, stronger, clearer. Their quirks, the ones who had quirks, began to change, to expand. Abilities that had been fixed at certain levels since adolescence suddenly grew. New expressions manifested. A person who could generate small flames found herself controlling fire across an entire room. A person who could lift twice their body weight found themselves lifting 10 times that. And some of them, the quirkless, the ones who had never had a quirk, the ones who had been told their entire lives that they were less, felt something awaken in their cells for the first time. The virus didn't just enhance existing quirks. It created new biological capabilities in bodies that had never had them. The quirkless evolved alongside the quirked, their bodies accepting the change with a compatibility rate that was, ironically, slightly higher than the general population. Izuku had known this would be the case. Quirkless biology was, in many ways, more flexible than quirked biology. Unburdened by the rigid structures of an existing quirk factor, the quirkless genome was more receptive to the kind of radical alteration the Ouroboros imposed. The people who had been told they were less were, in the language of the virus, more adaptable. There was a bitter poetry in that. Izuku didn't comment on it. Poetry was for people who have things about facts. He watched it all from the production facility. The monitors displayed real-time data, atmospheric dispersal rates, confirmed cases of evolution, confirmed cases of rejection, population density maps overlaid with compatibility projections. The numbers matched his models within a 2% margin of error. The virus was working. The world was changing. The equation was solving itself. Those inferior beings will perish as a new world is born, he said quietly, watching the data scroll across his screens. The words carried no pleasure, no satisfaction. The same tone as a weather report, the same emotional register as reading a train schedule. This is the natural order. I am simply the mechanism. He watched for another hour. Then he turned from the monitors and looked out through the facility's observation window. A narrow slit of reinforced glass that showed a slice of the city's skyline, the buildings standing against a sky that was, at this very moment, carrying the seeds of a new species in its currents. The sun was setting. The light was gold. He watched it go down. The weeks that followed were the longest in human history. The death toll climbed in ways that broke the counting. Systems failed. Governments stumbled. The infrastructure that held civilization together, hospitals, supply chains, communication networks, the invisible architecture of normal life, strained under the weight of a crisis that had no precedent and no analog and no solution except the one that was already happening whether anyone wanted it or not. But it didn't collapse. That was the part that the doomsday predictions missed. The compatible evolved. And the evolved, for all the trauma and grief and horror of watching people around them die, were still people. They still had hands and minds and the stubborn, irrational, fundamentally human compulsion to keep things running even when the world was falling apart. The evolved went to work. The evolved kept hospitals open. The evolved maintained power grids and water supplies and the 1,000 small functions that kept cities alive. They did it with bodies that were changing, with abilities that were growing, with a strength and clarity that they hadn't had a week ago, and that made the impossible tasks of daily survival merely difficult. Hero society didn't collapse. It transformed. The distinction between hero and civilian blurred as evolved individuals discovered capabilities that matched or exceeded those of professional heroes. The ranking system, already shaken by All Might's fall, became meaningless when a former office worker could generate force fields that rivaled Best Genist's combat output. The heroes who survived, the compatible ones, the 30%, found themselves in a world where their professional monopoly on power had dissolved overnight. Some of them adapted. Some of them couldn't. Endeavor survived. His body accepted the virus with a compatibility that surprised no one who knew his genetic history. The Todoroki breeding program, for all its cruelty, had produced a bloodline of exceptional biological flexibility. The evolution enhanced his quirk to levels that would have been called godlike a month ago, and were now simply the new baseline for someone of his capability. His flames burned hotter. His control expanded. His endurance increased to the point where he could maintain maximum output for hours instead of minutes. He stood in his agency, surrounded by the wreckage of a world he had spent his life climbing to the top of, and looked at his hands. The flames danced between his fingers, brighter and more alive than they had ever been. And he felt nothing, because the top of the mountain didn't exist anymore. The mountain itself had been replaced. Class 1A survived. Most of them, of the 20 students who had walked into UA's Class 1A at the beginning of the year, 14 were compatible. 14 bodies that accepted the virus and evolved. Their quirks expanding, their physical capabilities increasing, their entire biological framework being rewritten into something that made their pre-virus selves look like rough drafts. 6 were not compatible. The names of the 6 who died were recorded in the private memories of those who survived them. The school held no formal memorial. The world was too broken for formal anything. But the surviving 14 carried those 6 names the way you carry a weight that never gets lighter. You just get stronger. Denki Kaminari didn't make it. His electricity-based quirk had been fundamentally incompatible with the virus's neural rewiring protocol. The same electrical pathways that made his quirk function were the ones the virus tried to change. and the conflict between the two systems was fatal. He died in the UA dormitory in his bed, surrounded by classmates who couldn't do anything except hold his hands and watch the light leave his eyes. Kyokujiro sat beside him until the end. She didn't plug her earphone jacks in. She didn't want to hear his heartbeat stop. Minoru Mineta didn't make it. The virus identified his quirk factor as biologically non-enhanceable. The cellular structures that produced his sticky orbs were too specialized, too rigid, unable to accept the radical alteration the Ouroboros demanded. He died in a hospital, alone, because the hospitals were too overwhelmed for anyone to sit with him. Mashirao Ojiro, Rikido Sato, Koji Koda, Toru Hagakure, 6 names, 6 empty seats. 6 reminders that evolution does not ask who deserves to live. The 14 who survived were changed. Katsuki Bakugo survived, and the evolution hit him like gasoline on an already burning fire. His quirk, the nitroglycerin sweat, the explosive power that had always been his identity and his weapon, and his proof that he was born to be at the top, expanded beyond every limit it had ever had. The explosions that had once been impressive were now devastating. The range, the control, the raw output, all of it multiplied by a factor that made his pre-virus self look like a firecracker compared to an artillery barrage. But the change went deeper than his quirk. His body was stronger, faster. His reflexes operated at a level that made his previous speed look pedestrian. His eyes could track movements that would have been a blur a month ago. His muscles generated force that would have broken his pre-virus bones. He stood in the training grounds of UA, the grounds that were now being used as a staging area for evolved individuals trying to understand their new capabilities, and detonated an explosion that shattered every window in a 3-block radius. Then he stood in the aftermath, chest heaving, palms smoking, and looked at his hands. He was furious. He was always furious. But underneath the fury, in the place where he had buried the memory of red eyes and a hand around his throat, and the crushing understanding that he had never mattered less, something had shifted. The evolution had done something to the anger, changed its composition. It was still hot, still consuming, still the driving force of everything he did, but it was aimed differently now. Before the virus, Bakugo's anger had been pointed at the world for not acknowledging him. After the virus, it was pointed at himself for not being strong enough to have mattered when it counted. He thought about Izuku Midoriya, about the boy he had bullied and dismissed and told to jump off a roof, about the monster that boy had become. About the moment on the rooftop of the USJ when those red eyes had looked at him and found him completely, totally beneath consideration. He felt something he had never felt before, something that sat in his chest like a coal, burning steady and hot, impossible to extinguish. It was respect. Pure, burning, furious respect that he would never admit out loud, because admitting it meant admitting that everything he had believed about himself and about Izuku and about the hierarchy of the world had been wrong from the start. It meant admitting that the quirkless kid he had looked down on his entire life had been, in every way that mattered, above him. Always. He was standing on the same side of history's line as Izuku Midoriya now. They both knew it. The thought made Bakugo's palms crackle with explosions that he couldn't entirely control. He would never be loyal. He would never be tame. He would never look at Izuku and say the words that his pride refused to form. But he was standing, and he was evolved. And somewhere in the compound of fury and respect and the burning refusal to be left behind, he was becoming something that the old world had never had room for him to become. Shoto Todoroki survived, and his evolution was quiet and absolute. The internal war that his father had built into him, fire on the left, ice on the right, the two halves of a quirk divided against itself by the trauma of a childhood designed to produce a weapon, was resolved in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The virus didn't care about Todoroki's emotional architecture. It didn't care that he had refused to use his fireside for years, that the flames reminded him of his father, that the ice was his rebellion, and the fire was his cage. The virus looked at his DNA, found two complementary quirk expressions that were being artificially suppressed by psychological limitation, and removed the limitation. Todoroki felt it happen. He was standing on the roof of the dormitory when the evolution hit, the warmth spreading through his body, the cellular rewriting, The brief and total pain of every limit he had ever imposed on himself being burned away at the genetic level. His right hand produced ice. His left hand produced fire. They had always done that, but now they did it simultaneously, together. A single, unified expression of a quirk that had been fighting with itself since the day he was born. He stood on the roof and let both sides loose at the same time. Fire and ice erupted from his body in a spiral, intertwined, complementary, feeding each other rather than fighting. The ice generated by his right side was colder than anything he had ever produced. The fire on his left was hotter. And between them, at the center where the two forces met and merged, was something new. A thermal manipulation ability that went beyond either element, that let him control temperature itself as a concept rather than just its expressions. He lowered his hands. The spiral dissipated. The rooftop was untouched. The fire hadn't burned it and the ice hadn't frozen it because his control was total now, absolute in a way it had never been. He looked at his hands. Left, right, equal, whole. He thought about Izuku, about the man in black who had walked into the USJ and broken the world, about the red eyes behind dark glasses and the calm, measured voice that said things that sounded like prophecy, about the moment Izuku had shattered his ice with a flex and hadn't even addressed him, hadn't even considered him worth speaking to. When he saw Izuku again, standing among the evolved, those red eyes uncovered, the sunglasses absent for the first time, Todoroki said nothing. He didn't need to. He nodded once. The nod of someone who understood what had happened, what it had cost, and what it meant, and who had decided to stand in the new world rather than mourn the old one. Izuku nodded back. Aizawa survived. This surprised no one more than Aizawa himself. His quirk, erasure, the ability to nullify other quirks by looking at them, had always been a subtle ability, more tool than weapon, defined by its interaction with other people's power rather than generating its own. The virus evolved it into something else entirely. His erasure expanded from a visual contact requirement to an area of effect field, a zone of quirk suppression that extended 15 meters in every direction from his body, active as long as he maintained concentration. Within that zone, quirks didn't just deactivate, they ceased to exist. The quirk factor itself went dormant, suppressed at the genetic level rather than the practical level. It was, in its own way, the perfect evolution. The man who had always been about control was given more of it than he had ever imagined. He stood apart from the evolved. He always stood apart. It was his nature, the underground hero's instinct to observe from the margin. He looked at the world that was forming around the wreckage of the old one, and he saw it with the eyes of someone who understood exactly what had been taken and exactly why the result made it impossible to argue. The old world had been comfortable, familiar, structured around assumptions that everyone agreed not to question, and it had been failing. Slowly, invisibly, in the ways that big systems fail. Not in a single catastrophic moment, but in 1,000 small compromises, 1,000 small cruelties, 1,000 small moments where someone who needed help was told they couldn't be helped because the system wasn't designed for them. Izuku Midoriya had been one of those moments. A quirkless, workless boy told he couldn't be a hero, told his dream was impossible, told that the genetic lottery he'd lost defined the life he was allowed to live. The system had looked at him and declared him worthless, and he had responded by declaring the system worthless in return, and then proving it. Aizawa didn't agree with what Izuku had done. The deaths, billions of deaths, the incompatible ones, the people whose only crime was being born with the wrong cellular flexibility, sat in his chest like a stone that would never dissolve. He would carry that weight for the rest of his life. He would never look at the new world without seeing the ghost of the old one underneath it. But he was a practical man. He had always been a practical man. And the practical truth was that the new world existed. The evolved were here. The old structures were gone. And someone needed to make sure that what came next wasn't just a stronger version of the same broken thing that had come before. He would do that, quietly, from the margins. The way he had always done everything, time moved forward. The chaos settled. The grief remained, would always remain, but the sharp edge of it dulled enough for people to start thinking about tomorrow instead of just surviving today. The evolved gathered, not because they were summoned, not because they were commanded. They gathered because human beings, no matter how changed, no matter how enhanced, no matter how fundamentally their biology has been rewritten, are still human beings. And human beings build things, they organize, they look for structure and meaning and someone who can tell them what comes next. They found Izuku. He wasn't hiding. He had stopped hiding the moment the dispersal began. He was in a location he had chosen specifically, a place with weight and visibility and the kind of symbolic resonance that turned a meeting place into a landmark. The empty lot where UA, high school's main building, had stood before the crisis destroyed it. The hill overlooking Musutafu, where the lights had once glowed in the distance and represented everything that hero society aspired to be. The school was gone. The hill remained. And on the hill stood the person who had ended one era and started another. They came in small groups at first, then larger ones. The evolved. From across the city, across the country, from the places where the virus had reached and the transformation had taken hold. They came because they had felt the change and understood on a cellular level that went deeper than thought that it had been deliberate, that someone had done this to them. And they wanted to see that someone's face. Izuku stood before them, hundreds at first, then thousands. The black coat, the green hair, the red eyes uncovered, no sunglasses, the vertical slits, and the deep, glowing crimson visible to everyone who looked at him. He had removed the glasses deliberately. This was the moment that didn't allow for masks. He looked at them. The first generation of evolved humanity, the survivors, the ones whose cells had said yes. "You survived," he told them. His voice carried across the open space without amplification, the enhanced acoustics of a body that had been engineered for exactly this kind of moment. "That means you were already what I was looking for." The transition simply confirmed it. He let the words settle. Thousands of faces looking up at him, some with gratitude, some with rage, some with grief for the ones they had lost, some with awe, some with the blank expression of people who were still processing a world that had changed too fast for their minds to keep up. What you were before, quirked or quirkless, hero or civilian, powerful or powerless, none of it matters now. The categories are gone. The lottery is over. What you are now is what you were always capable of being. The virus didn't give you anything you didn't already have inside you. It removed the barriers that kept it hidden. He paused. The wind moved across the hilltop. His coat shifted. His green hair moved across his forehead. And for one instant, one brief, fleeting instant, the freckles on his face and the way the wind caught his hair made him look like someone else. Someone younger. Someone who had stood in this exact spot as a child and looked up at the school that represented everything he wanted to be. The instant passed. The red eyes remained. The old world is gone. The system that ranked you by the accident of your genetics, that rewarded the lucky and punished the rest, that dressed up injustice in hero costumes and called it civilization, it's over. What comes next is yours to build. What comes next is the world that the old one was always too afraid to become. He looked across the crowd, found specific faces. Bakugo, standing at the edge, arms crossed, explosions crackling faintly from his palms, his face a mask of barely contained fury that was, underneath, the most honest acknowledgement of Izuku's authority that he was capable of producing. Todoroki, still and quiet, fire and ice in perfect balance, his mismatched eyes steady. Aizawa, at the back, observing from the margin, his erasure field humming faintly around him like a whispered warning to anyone who got too close. He saw them. They saw him. Nothing else needed to be said. Weeks became months. Months became the beginning of something that didn't have a name yet, because the language for it hadn't been invented. The evolved built. Slowly at first, clearing the wreckage, restoring infrastructure, establishing the basic functions of a civilization that had lost a significant portion of its population and gained a set of capabilities that changed every assumption about what was possible. The enhanced strength and speed and cognitive ability of the evolved made reconstruction faster than anyone would have predicted. Buildings went up in days instead of months. Power systems were redesigned by evolved engineers whose enhanced minds could solve problems that pre-virus humanity would have spent decades on. The quirk system dissolved. There were no more quirks in the traditional sense. The virus had rewritten the quirk factor at the species level, replacing the random, uncontrolled genetic expressions with something more integrated, more deliberate, more fundamentally tied to the individual's biology. The evolved had abilities, yes, but the abilities were them, extensions of their bodies and minds, as natural and personal as a fingerprint. The idea of ranking them, of organizing them into a hierarchy based on combat applications and media appeal, felt as absurd as ranking people by the color of their eyes. The hero system, as it had existed, did not survive. There was no need for it. The evolved didn't require a professional class of protectors, because the distinction between protector and citizen had been erased. Everyone was capable. Everyone was responsible. The framework that Izuku built, through quiet direction, through the infrastructure he had been designing since before the dispersal, was something closer to a cooperative than a hierarchy. Roles based on capability and choice, rather than inherited power and institutional gatekeeping. It was imperfect. It was messy. It was alive in a way that the old system, for all its polish and pageantry, had never been. And at the center of it, not ruling, not commanding, not smiling from the top of a pedestal the way All Might had, stood Izuku Midoriya. He was not a hero. He had never been a hero. He was something that the concept of heroism wasn't built to contain. He was the architect, the catalyst, the person who had looked at a broken world and decided that the only way to fix it was to burn it down to its foundation and build something new on top of the ashes. Whether the world would forgive him was irrelevant. Forgiveness was a transaction between people who operated on the same moral plane, and Izuku had left that plane the moment he pushed the needle into his vein in an underground lab and felt his DNA come apart and reassemble itself into something that the old world had no framework for. He didn't need forgiveness. He needed the equation to balance. And it had. The sun set on a Tuesday, the same day of the week that the dispersal had begun. The same day of the week that All Might had died, Izuku stood on the rooftop of the tallest structure in the rebuilt district, a tower that the Evolved had constructed in 3 weeks. Its architecture reflecting the new capabilities of its builders, its lines clean and strong and built to last in a way that the old buildings, for all their ambition, had never been. He could see the city from here. The whole city. The lights were different, brighter, steadier, powered by systems that the Evolved had designed from scratch. The sounds were different. The absence of sirens, the absence of the constant background noise of a society at war with itself. The air was different, cleaner, carrying the faint, almost imperceptible shimmer of the Ouroboros particles that still existed in the atmosphere, inert now, their work done, waiting in the background like a memory. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets. The wind moved through the open space of the rooftop and pushed his green hair across his forehead. His red eyes looked at the horizon, the line where the old world ended and the new one began, blurred now, the distinction fading the way all distinctions fade when enough time passes and enough things change. He reached into his coat. His fingers found the pocket watch, the silver one, engraved, the one he had carried since the day he walked out of his lab and into the night and became something the world wasn't ready for. He pulled it out, clicked it open. The watch face glowed faintly in the evening light. The hands ticked, measuring the passage of time the way they had always measured it, indifferent to the fact that the world around them had been rewritten at the genetic level. He looked at the time. He smiled, slow, cold, certain, the smile of a man standing at the end of a story that he had written himself. Every chapter, every line, every word placed exactly where it needed to be to arrive at this moment. He snapped the watch shut. The click was sharp and small and final. "I have always been ahead of my time," he said to the wind. The words left his mouth with the quiet certainty of someone stating a fact that the universe had finally confirmed. But time has finally caught up. He put the watch away, reached into his breast pocket and pulled out the sunglasses, midnight black lenses, sleek titanium frames, the same pair he had put on the first time he looked at his new eyes in a mirror in an underground lab that felt like a lifetime ago. He put them on, adjusted them with one finger. The red glow of his eyes vanished behind the dark lenses. He straightened his coat. The leather settled around his frame. The wind caught the hem and moved it behind him. He turned, walked toward the rooftop exit. His boots clicked on the concrete. Steady, measured, the same rhythm they had always had, the same walk. The walk of someone who had already decided what came next and was simply going through the motions of getting there. Below him, the new world hummed with the energy of something being born. The evolved moved through the streets. Lights came on in buildings. Conversations happened. Lives continued, changed, enhanced, carried forward by biology that had been rewritten by a boy who was told he couldn't be a hero and chose to be something the word hero wasn't big enough to hold. Izuku walked into the stairwell. The door closed behind him. His footsteps faded, clicking down the stairs, steady, unhurried, moving into the future he had built, into the world he had forced into existence, into the thing that everyone else had called impossible and he had called inevitable. He did not look back.
Huge salute to the legends fueling this journey. Your support is the engine behind everything we do. Whether you're on the front lines or reaching for the stars, you make this possible. Pro heroes, the elite front line, stepping up and setting the pace for the whole community. Dark Eye, DI, Fire 05, Govs LNS. Symbol of peace. The pillars of the community, the titans who keep our foundation solid and the hype at an all-time high. Kelvin Bowman, Mr. Panda, AZ Atros, Dweller of the Deepest Depths, Lone Wolf, Damian Leon, Jacob Rops, Jan L., Christian Mullins, Bully Maguire Shadow, Neo Star Productions, Asael Cardenas, Shaquan Simmons, Suna Wind 631, Elijah Saunders, Peter Hamilton, Freddie Rose, Omega, Akuma Noakami, Chris Talley, Remorsefuls, Blackvein, Joshua Hedrington, Aaron Abercrombie, Drift SK Eater, Akeno Himejima, Corey Tokars, Jan, Devin Black, Crow, Dasher Games, Joe Bros, Ray Von Crimson River, Dante Alistar, Adam Yonkers, Blood Saints, Donna Cafe, Zeph, KC, Howie 60, Ignatius, Albert. Hope of the universe. The ultimate guardians. Celestial tier supporters whose impact shines across the galaxy. Noroi Uzumaki Uchiha, Kishan, Coldbane 4, The Maniac 563, Debs, LS Morningstar, Marl, Spintown, Ixshoot X50, Greg Green, James, Quan Yin Thompson, Juan, Zeno KJ. And that is what happens when you tell a quirkless kid he can never be a hero. If this story destroyed your soul in the best possible way, smash that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe, because there's way more chaos where this came from. I'll catch you in the next one.